My neighbor told me someone stood at my back door for 10 minutes, then calmly walked away when the porch light came. I found the house in early October, right when the trees in the neighborhood were starting to turn. It was a rental, a small 2-bedroom with a fenced backyard and a porch that wrapped around to the back door. Nothing fancy. Peeling paint on the shutters, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 90s, and a bathroom fan that sounded like it was dying every time you flipped the switch. But the rent was cheap, the neighborhood was quiet, and I could work from home without anyone bothering me. That was enough. I'd moved out there for a remote job, data entry for an insurance company, the kind of work that slowly drains your soul but pays just well enough that you don't quit. I didn't know anyone in the area, didn't really need to. I had my laptop, my routines, and a grocery store 10 minutes away. That was my whole world for a while. The neighborhood was mostly older folks, retired couples who waved from the driveways, a few families with young kids, the occasional dog walker. The kind of street where people still left their garage doors open during the day. It felt safe. It felt like the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Those first few weeks, I slept with the window cracked just enough to hear the rain collecting in the old gutters. There's something about that sound in an unfamiliar house. It fills the silence without being intrusive, makes the place feel lived in even when you're the only one there. I'd lie in bed listening to the water trickle down the drain pipe and the occasional rumble of distant thunder, and I'd think, yeah, I could be happy here. My neighbor across the back fence was a woman named Linda. Early 70s, retired, lived alone with a cat named Biscuit, who liked to sit on her windowsill and judge the world. Linda was one of those neighbors who noticed everything. Not in a nosy way, more in a protective way. She knew when the mail came late. She knew which cars belonged on the street and which ones didn't. She'd lived in that house for over 30 years, and I think she considered the whole block her responsibility. We started talking over the fence a few days after I moved in. She brought me a plate of cookies, snickerdoodles, homemade, still warm, and told me the previous tenant had been a nice boy but loud. She asked what I did for work, if I had family nearby, if I needed anything. It wasn't intrusive. It was genuine. The kind of warmth you don't expect from a stranger but immediately trust when you feel it. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. She'd wave from her kitchen window in the mornings. I'd bring her trash cans in if I saw them out too long. Sometimes we'd talk over the fence for 10, 15 minutes, about the weather, about Biscuit's latest vet visit, about nothing in particular. She told me her husband had passed 4 years earlier, and that keeping busy was how she kept sane. I told her about my job, about adjusting to living alone in a new place. She said I reminded her of her granddaughter. It was nice. All of it was nice. My routine was simple. Work from 9 to 5, sometimes later. Make dinner, usually something easy, pasta or a frozen meal, nothing ambitious. Watch something on my laptop in bed. Lock the doors, check the windows, lights off by midnight. The house had a motion sensor light on the back porch that would click on whenever something moved in the yard. Raccoons, usually. Sometimes a stray cat. It flickered on and off a lot in those early weeks. I kept telling myself I'd fix the sensitivity on the sensor, but I never got around to it. The back door was one of those old wooden ones with a window in the upper half. A single deadbolt. The kind of door that felt solid enough during the day but seemed thinner at night, when the wind pressed against it and the porch light cast strange shadows across the glass. I'd lock it every evening without thinking. Muscle memory. Turn the deadbolt, check the knob, move on. I never thought about why I was locking it. It was just something you do. 7 weeks in, everything still felt settled. Normal. I was sleeping well, eating regularly, getting into a groove with work. The neighborhood was exactly as quiet as advertised. I remember thinking I'd gotten lucky. Good house, good street, good neighbor. The kind of place you could stay for a while. It was a Thursday morning when Linda caught me at the mailbox. Early November by then. cold enough that I could see my breath. She was bundled up in a heavy coat, with Biscuit watching from the window behind her, and she had this look on her face. Not panicked, not scared, just serious. Like she'd been waiting to tell me something and had been rehearsing how to say it. "Honey," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to be alarmed." She told me she'd been up late the night before, couldn't sleep, bad hip, and had gone to the kitchen to make tea. Her kitchen window faces my backyard, and while she was standing there, waiting for the kettle, she saw someone standing at my back door. Not knocking, not trying the handle, just standing there, facing the door, perfectly still. For about 10 minutes. Then my porch light clicked on, and they turned and walked away. Not ran, not hurried, just turned, calm as anything, and walked into the dark along the side of my house and out toward the street. I laughed. I actually laughed. Told her it was probably just someone cutting through yards, maybe a drunk who got confused. She didn't laugh back. She just looked at me with that serious expression and said, "People don't stand still for 10 minutes, sweetheart." I thanked her, told her I'd keep an eye out, and went back inside. Locked the door behind me out of habit. Stood in my kitchen for a minute, staring at the back door, trying to picture someone on the other side of it. Then I made coffee and went back to work. Pushed it out of my mind completely. At first, I told myself Linda was just being Linda, watching the neighborhood, seeing shapes in the dark, making something out of nothing. That night, I checked the back door before bed. Deadbolt locked, knob locked, window intact. I even stepped outside onto the porch for a second and looked around the yard. Nothing but wet leaves and the neighbor's fence and darkness beyond the tree line at the edge of the property. The rain had picked up again, steady and cold, tapping against the porch railing in little bursts. Everything looked exactly how it always looked. I went to bed telling myself it was nothing. Fell asleep fine, slept through the night. But around 1 a.m., I woke up. Not because of a noise, or maybe it was a noise, I'm not sure. Sometimes you wake up and you can't explain why, and you just lie there in the dark trying to figure out what pulled you out of sleep. The rain was still going, drumming softly on the roof. The house was doing its usual thing, the radiator ticking, the fridge humming from the kitchen, the occasional creak of old wood settling in the cold. Then the porch light clicked on. I could see it from my bed, that faint orange glow bleeding through the hallway from the kitchen. It stayed on for maybe 30 seconds, then shut off. I lay there staring at the ceiling, heart beating just a little faster than normal, and told myself it was a raccoon, a cat, a branch swaying too close to the sensor. The same things that had triggered it a dozen times before. I rolled over and went back to sleep, or tried to. The next morning, I almost mentioned it to Linda, but didn't. I felt stupid. A porch light turned on in the middle of the night. So what? That's not a story. That's not anything. I didn't want to be the girl who panicked over nothing, who made her elderly neighbor worry for no reason. So I let it go. 3 days passed. Normal days. Work, dinner, laptop, bed. Rain off and on. The porch light clicked on once around 11 p.m. on Saturday night, but I glanced out the kitchen window and saw a raccoon waddling along the fence. Mystery solved. I actually felt relieved, like that little bandit had just confirmed everything was fine and I could stop being ridiculous. Then Tuesday came. I'd gotten home from the grocery store around 6, brought everything in through the front door, put it all away. When I went to take the recycling out the back door, I noticed the welcome mat was crooked. Not dramatically, just shifted about 6 inches to the left, angled slightly, like someone had stepped on the edge of it and dragged it. I stood there looking at it for probably 10 seconds, trying to remember if I'd kicked it coming in or out. Couldn't remember. Straightened it out and went back inside. It was such a small thing. The kind of detail you wouldn't even register most days. but I registered it, and I didn't know why, and that bothered me more than the mat itself. I called my friend Jess that night, told her about what Linda had said, about the porch light, about the mat. She was quiet for a second, then said, "Okay, that's creepy. Get a camera." I told her I'd look into it. She said, "No, don't look into it, just get one, like tomorrow." I said, "Okay." I didn't order one tomorrow. The following Friday, Linda flagged me down again. I was coming back from a walk, earbuds in, and she was standing at her fence with her arms crossed, that same serious look on her face. My stomach dropped before she even opened her mouth. "It happened again," she said. "Last night, same thing." She told me she'd woken up around 2 a.m. Biscuit had knocked something off the counter, and when she passed by her kitchen window, she saw the figure again, standing at my back door. Same spot, same posture, facing the door, completely still. This time she'd tried to take a photo with her phone, but it was too dark and too far, just a blur. She watched for a few minutes, not sure what to do, and then my porch light clicked on, and the person walked away, same direction as before, along the side of the house, toward the street. Calm, unhurried. "They weren't startled," she said. "The light came on, and they just left, like they were done." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not full-blown fear, not yet. More like a door opening somewhere inside me that I'd been trying to keep shut. I thanked Linda, told her I'd handle it. Went inside and locked the back door and stood in the kitchen again, staring at it. The window in the upper half of the door looked different now. During the day, it was just a window. I could see the porch, the yard, the fence. But standing there in the late afternoon gray, with the rain streaking down the glass, I couldn't stop imagining a face on the other side of it. Someone standing right there, inches from the glass, looking in while I looked out. I checked the door frame, checked the window. That's when I noticed the smudge. It was on the outside of the glass, low, near the bottom of the window pane. A faint, greasy mark. Could have been from my hand, from the previous tenant, from anyone. But it was shaped wrong for a casual touch. It looked like someone had pressed their fingers flat against the glass and held them there. 4 fingers, spread slightly apart, angled downward, like they'd been leaning in, trying to see inside. I wiped it off with a paper towel and Windex. Locked the door again, even though it was already locked. Closed the blinds for the first time since I'd moved in. That night I lay in bed and listened to the rain and couldn't sleep. Every sound the house made, every creak, every tick of the radiator, every gust of wind pushing against the windows, sounded different now. Not comforting, not neutral. Every noise was a question I couldn't answer. Was that the house settling? Or was that a footstep on the porch? I pulled the covers up to my chin like a kid. Kept my phone on my chest, screen facing up, volume on full. Watched the ceiling and waited for the porch light to click on. It didn't. Not that night. Somehow, that was worse. I ordered the camera on Saturday morning. Cheap wireless thing. $40, decent reviews, connected to an app on my phone. It arrived Monday. I set it up on the inside of the kitchen window, angled down toward the back porch and the door. The image wasn't great, grainy, washed out, the night vision turning everything into shades of gray and green. But you could see the door, you could see the porch, you could see if someone was standing there. That first night, I checked the feed probably 15 times before bed. Nothing. Just the empty porch, the rain streaking diagonally through the frame, the occasional moth drifting past the lens. I woke up the next morning and scrubbed through the whole night on 4 times speed. Nothing. Same thing the second night. Empty porch, rain, moths. Part of me started to relax. Maybe it was over. Maybe whoever it was had moved on, found somewhere else to be, lost interest. The third night, I almost didn't check the footage. I woke up around 7, made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up the app more out of habit than expectation. Hit play from midnight and let it run on fast forward while I scrolled through emails. At 2:17 a.m., something moved. I stopped the playback, rewound, hit play at normal speed. From the right side of the frame, from the direction of the side yard, a figure walked into view. Slow, deliberate steps. They crossed the porch and stopped directly in front of the back door. Then they just stood there. Dark clothes, hood up, hands at their sides, facing the door, not moving. I sat at my kitchen table watching this person stand at my back door, and my whole body went cold. Not figuratively, I felt the temperature drop out of my skin. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set my phone down on the table because I was afraid I'd drop it. The timestamp ticked forward. 2:17, 2:19, 2:22, 2:25. They didn't shift their weight, didn't muck around, didn't reach for the handle. Just stood there, facing the door, like they were waiting for it to open on its own. Like they had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. At 2:28, 11 minutes, the porch light clicked on. The figure didn't flinch, didn't startle. They turned, smooth and calm, and walked back the way they'd come, along the side of the house, out of frame, gone. I watched it 3 more times. Each time I noticed something new. The way their head was tilted slightly downward, like they were looking at the door handle or the base of the door. The way their hands hung perfectly still, no fidgeting, no clenching, no movement at all. The way they walked away like someone leaving a store, not someone caught doing something wrong. I called the non-emergency police line with my hands still trembling. Told them everything. Linda, the figure, the footage. The officer on the phone was polite, but not particularly concerned. He said it sounded like suspicious activity, and they'd file a report. Asked if the person had tried to enter the home. I said no. Asked if they'd made threats. I said no. Asked if I could identify them. I said no. "We'll note it in the system," he said. "If they attempt entry or make contact, call 911 immediately." That was it. Noted in the system. I hung up feeling worse than before I'd called. I told Linda about the footage. She nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something she already knew. "You need to be careful," she said. Quiet. Not dramatic. Just a fact. That night I couldn't settle. I made dinner but barely touched it. Tried to watch something on my laptop but couldn't focus. Kept pulling up the camera feed on my phone, watching the empty porch in real time. The rain falling through the night vision, the porch light off, the door closed and locked. Everything still. Everything fine. I went to bed at 11. Left the camera app open on my phone, propped up on the nightstand with the screen facing me. Told myself I'd just glance at it if I woke up. Told myself I was being proactive, not paranoid. Told myself I was in control. I woke up at 1:48 a.m. No alarm, no sound that I could identify. Just that same feeling, pulled from sleep by something I couldn't maim. Heart already beating too fast before my eyes were fully open. I reached for the phone. The figure was there, standing at my back door, right now, live. The timestamp in the corner of the screen ticking forward in real time. 1:48, 1:49. The rain blurring the image slightly, but the shape was unmistakable. Dark clothes, hood, hands at their sides, facing the door. They were on the other side of my house, maybe 30 feet from where I was lying. I couldn't move. I mean that literally. My brain was screaming at me to do something. get up, call someone, turn on every light in the house, but my body wouldn't respond. I just lay there, phone in my hand, watching this person stand at my door in the dark, and I couldn't make myself move. My legs felt like they were filled with sand. My chest was so tight I could barely breathe. The rain on the roof sounded like static, like white noise filling my skull. I don't know how long I lay there before I finally managed to dial 911. It felt like 10 minutes. It was probably 90 seconds. My voice cracked when the dispatcher picked up. I whispered my address, told them someone was at my back door, told them I was alone. She asked if I could see them. I said yes. She said, "Stay on the line. Don't approach the door. Officers are on the way." While I was giving her my cross streets, the porch light clicked on. The figure turned. Same slow rotation, same calm pace. Walked off the porch and into the dark, like they were going home after a long day. By the time the police arrived, 22 minutes later, there was no one. No footprints they could find in the wet grass. No evidence anyone had been there at all. They checked the yard, the side of the house, walked the block. Nothing. One of the officers told me to keep an eye on it and make sure my doors were locked. I almost laughed. I was already keeping an eye on it. I was watching it happen live from my bed, paralyzed and shaking, while a stranger stood at my door in the rain and waited for God knows what. They left. I sat on my kitchen floor with every light in the house on and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Jess came and picked me up the next morning. I didn't even argue. She took one look at me, unwashed, barely functioning, running on coffee and adrenaline and whatever you call the opposite of sleep, and said, "You're staying with me tonight." I grabbed a bag, threw in enough for a couple days, and walked out the front door without looking back. I left the camera running. Jess's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown. Secure entry, neighbors on every side, street noise, light. Everything my house wasn't. I took a shower that lasted 20 minutes, ate half a sandwich, and passed out on her couch at 4 in the afternoon. Slept for 11 hours straight, dreamless. The first real sleep I'd gotten in over a week. When I woke up the next morning, I lay there for a while, just listening to the sounds of the building. Someone's TV through the wall, a door closing down the hall, traffic outside. Normal sounds, human sounds. The kind of noise that means you're not alone in a good way. Then I picked up my phone and opened the camera app. The footage had been recording all night. I scrubbed to midnight and started fast-forwarding, watching the empty porch scroll by in double time. Rain, darkness, nothing. 1 a.m. Nothing. 1:30, nothing. 1:55 a.m. The figure appeared. Same direction. Same slow walk onto the porch. Same stop in front of the door. Same posture, hood up, hands at sides, facing the door, motionless. I was watching from 30 miles away, safe in my friend's apartment, and my heart was still hammering. My mouth went dry. Because even though I wasn't there, they didn't know that. They came anyway. Same time, same routine, like clockwork. But this time was different. At the 6-minute mark, the figure moved. Not away, not to the side. They reached forward, slow, deliberate, and took hold of the door handle. I stopped breathing. They didn't yank it, didn't rattle it, just gripped it and turned, slowly, testing. The deadbolt held. The handle didn't give. They held it there for a few seconds, then released, stepped back, stood still again for another minute or so. Then the porch light clicked on, and they left. Same direction, same pace, same calm. I played it back 4 times. The way their hand reached out, the way their fingers closed around the handle. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't rushed. It was patient, methodical, like they were checking, like they were learning the lock, like they were figuring out how to get in. I showed Jess. She watched it once, set the phone down, and said, "You're not going back there alone." I called the police again. Different officer this time. I told him about the footage, the escalation, the door handle. He asked if entry had been made. I said no. He said they'd add it to the existing report. I asked what else I could do. He said I could consider additional security measures. I wanted to scream, but I had to go back. My laptop was there, my work files, most of my clothes. Jess drove me over the next afternoon. Broad daylight, sunny even, one of those sharp November days where the cold is clean and the sky is almost painfully blue. The house looked the same. Small, quiet, paint still peeling, totally ordinary. The kind of house you'd drive past without a second thought. We went in through the front. Everything inside was exactly as I'd left it. Dishes in the sink, blanket bunched up on the couch, coffee mug on the counter. Nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. I went to the back door to check the lock. That's when I saw them. Scratch marks. Around the deadbolt. On the inside edge of the door frame, near the bottom of the lock plate. Small, thin gouges in the wood. Not deep, but deliberate. Clustered around the bolt mechanism, like someone had been working at it with a flathead screwdriver or a knife, testing the frame, feeling for give. They weren't old. The exposed wood underneath was pale and fresh, not weathered. These hadn't been here when I moved in. I would have noticed. I stared at them, crouched down on the kitchen floor, running my finger over the grooves, and something shifted inside me. Not fear this time, something quieter and colder. This person hadn't just been standing at my door. They'd been working on it. The standing was part of it. The watching, the waiting, the patience. But it wasn't the whole picture. They'd been studying the door, the lock, the light, figuring out the timing of the motion sensor, learning how long they had before it clicked on. And at some point, maybe a night the camera wasn't there, maybe a night I didn't check, they'd started trying to get through. I packed everything I could fit into 2 suitcases and 4 trash bags. Jess helped me carry it all to the car. I didn't fold anything, didn't organize, just grabbed and shoved and moved. The whole time I kept glancing at the back door, half expecting to see a shape through the window, even though it was 2 p.m. and the sun was out and Jess was standing right next to me. I locked the front door on my way out. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or maybe some part of me still wanted to believe the locks mattered. I never went back. I stayed with Jess for 2 weeks. Slept on her couch, worked from her kitchen table, lived out of trash bags and suitcases like a refugee from my own life. She never complained, never made me feel like a burden. But I could tell she was worried. Not just about the situation, but about me. I wasn't eating much, wasn't sleeping well, even there. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and check the camera app out of habit, even though there was nothing to check anymore. The feed just showed my empty kitchen, my empty porch, my empty yard. I called my landlord and explained everything. Told him about the figure, the footage, the scratch marks on the door frame. He was sympathetic in the way people are when they feel bad but don't want to deal with something. Said he'd change the locks and check the property. Asked if I wanted him to call the police on his end. I told him I'd already filed reports. He said he understood if I needed to break the lease. I broke the lease, paid the fee. Found a new apartment across town. 2nd floor, secured building, cameras in the lobby and the parking garage. The kind of place where you badge in and badge out, and there's always someone at the front desk. I moved in the first week of December. It was Linda I felt worst about leaving. I called her to let her know I was moving, and she went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm glad you're going somewhere safe." She didn't try to talk me out of it. Didn't tell me I was overreacting. She just said she'd miss me and to keep in touch. We talked on the phone a few times after that. She told me the house sat empty for about 3 weeks before the landlord found a new tenant, a young couple. And she told me something that I still think about almost every day. The figure never came back. Not once. Not after I left. Linda watched. She told me she'd started checking her kitchen window every night around 2 a.m. Force of habit, couldn't help it. Nothing. The porch stayed dark. The back door stayed undisturbed. Whatever had been happening, whoever had been standing there, they stopped the moment I was gone. It wasn't random. It wasn't someone cutting through yards. It wasn't a confused drunk or a bored teenager or a coincidence. It was about me. Specifically me. And I have no idea why. The police never identified anyone. The case, if you can even call it that, went nowhere. I have the footage on my phone still. I've watched it more times than I should. I keep looking at the figure, trying to recognize something. A build, a gait, a posture. Trying to see a face under the hood. There's nothing. Just a shape in the dark, standing at my door, waiting for something I'll never understand. I think about the scratch marks a lot. The patience of them. Whoever this was, they weren't impulsive. They weren't breaking down the door in a frenzy. They were methodical. They came back night after night, stood in the same spot, waited the same amount of time, left when the light came on. And somewhere in between, on a night I didn't see, a night I was sleeping 20 feet away, they crouched down at my door and quietly, carefully, worked at the lock. I think about what would have happened if the porch light hadn't been there. If the sensor had died completely instead of just being glitchy. If they'd had 15 minutes of darkness instead of 11. 20 minutes. An hour. I think about what would have happened if they'd gotten through. I don't walk by that neighborhood anymore. I don't drive down that street. Jess told me once that I should think about talking to someone. A therapist, someone professional. And she's probably right. I check my locks 3 times before bed now. I have cameras on every door and window. I sleep with a bat next to my nightstand and my phone on my chest. And I still wake up at 2 a.m. sometimes, heart pounding, reaching for the screen to check a feed that doesn't show a back porch anymore. Linda still calls me every few weeks. She asks how I'm doing, tells me about Biscuit, fills me in on the neighborhood gossip. She never brings up what happened unless I do first. But once, near the end of a call, she said something that stuck with me. "You know what scared me the most?" she said. "It wasn't that he was standing there. It was that he wasn't in a hurry. People who are in a hurry, they're sloppy, they make mistakes. But that person, they were patient. They had a plan. And patient people don't give up. They just find another way." I thanked her, told her I loved her, hung up. Sat in my new apartment, in my locked building on the 2nd floor, with my cameras and my bat and my triple-checked deadbolt, and wondered if she was right. I still wonder. My elderly neighbor asked me to keep it down at night, then described sounds coming from my house. During the week I was on vacation. I don't think people talk enough about the specific kind of peace that comes from walking into your own house after a week away. Not a hotel, not a friend's guest room, your house. The one where your body knows the layout in the dark. Where you don't have to think about which way the bathroom door swings, or whether the shower runs hot on the left or the right. You just exist in it, the same way you exist inside your own skin. I'd been at my college buddy Derek's place out in Colorado for 7 days. Great trip. Hiked, drank too much, ate like garbage, slept on an air mattress that lost pressure every night around 3 a.m. By the time my flight landed on Sunday evening, I was the kind of tired that goes past your muscles and sits somewhere behind your eyes. All I wanted was my couch, my shower, and my bed, in that order. The house was exactly as I'd left it. That's the thing I keep coming back to, even now. It was exactly as I'd left it. Or at least, that's what I thought. I'd been renting the place for a little over 2 years by then. A single-story, 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in the kind of neighborhood where nothing happens. Built in the late 60s, you could tell by the low ceilings and the wood paneling in the hallway that the landlord never bothered to cover up. Small front yard, bigger backyard, a massive oak tree in the back corner that dropped acorns on the roof every fall, like a slow, lazy drum solo. The houses on either side were close, not townhouse close, but close enough that if your neighbor was grilling, you could smell it from your kitchen. I liked that street. I liked that house. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine in the way a rental becomes yours after long enough. I knew which burner on the stove ran hot, which window stuck if it rained, where to step in the hallway to avoid the creak near the bathroom. That creak was almost comforting. Proof that the house was settling around me the same way I'd settled into it. I pulled into the driveway around 8 that Sunday night, late August. Still warm, the kind of warmth that lingers after the sun goes down and turns the air thick and sweet. Crickets going, a sprinkler hissing somewhere a few houses over. Mrs. Dwyer's porch light on next door, same as always. That amber glow that had become as much a part of the street as the sidewalk cracks. Mrs. Dwyer. I should tell you about her, because she matters. She was mid-70s, maybe pushing 80. Widowed. Her husband, Frank, had passed before I moved in, and the neighbors filled me in on that with the kind of hushed reverence people use when they're telling you something they think you need to know. She lived alone, had a daughter somewhere in Ohio who visited twice a year. She kept her yard immaculate, put out a little American flag on the porch for every holiday, including some I didn't even know about, and she noticed everything. Not in a nosy way, more like watching the street was her primary occupation now. She knew when the mailman was late. She knew when the Hendersons across the road got a new car. She knew my schedule well enough that she once asked me if I was feeling all right because I'd come home from work an hour early on a Tuesday. We had a good thing, me and Mrs. Dwyer. I'd carry her trash cans in on Wednesday nights. She left me a plate of cookies at Christmas wrapped in foil with a little card that said, "From your neighbor, Dorothy Dwyer," in handwriting so precise it looked printed. We waved. We chatted about the weather sometimes. I liked her the way you like a person you don't really know, but are glad exists. I grabbed my bag from the trunk, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. That smell, the closed-up house smell. Not bad, just still. Stale air and dust and the faint ghost of whatever I'd last cooked before I left, which I think was scrambled eggs. The mail had piled up through the slot in the door, a little fan of envelopes and flyers spread across the tile. I nudged them aside with my foot, dropped my bag in the hallway, and stood there for a second, just breathing. Home. I did my usual return from trip sweep, opened a few windows to let the air move, checked the fridge. Nothing had gone bad, since I'd cleared it out before leaving. Turned on the kitchen light, then the living room lamp, reclaiming the space room by room. The house came back to life in pieces, the fridge humming, the central air kicking on with that familiar low rattle, the tick of the water heater in the utility closet off the kitchen. I showered, put on clean clothes, sat on the couch and watched something I don't remember on TV while eating crackers and peanut butter because I hadn't gone grocery shopping yet. By 10:30, I was done. I brushed my teeth, set my alarm, and got into bed. My bed, my pillow that knew the shape of my head, the ceiling I'd stared at 1,000 times. I fell asleep fast, slept hard. The kind of sleep where you don't dream and you don't move and you wake up in the exact position you fell asleep in. The next morning was Monday. I had the day off. I'd planned it that way, a buffer day to do laundry and ease back into real life. Around 9, I took the trash out to the curb. The sun was already aggressive, that late August heat where the pavement shimmers before noon. I was dragging the bin down the driveway when I heard the screen door next door. Mrs. Dwyer stepped onto her porch. She was in her usual uniform, floral blouse, khaki pants, white sneakers. But her face was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. She looked the way she always looked, except for something behind her eyes. An uncertainty. Like she'd been rehearsing what she was about to say and still wasn't sure she wanted to say it. She came to the fence line between our yards, rested one hand on the post. "Good morning," I said. "How are you doing, Mrs. Dwyer?" She smiled, but it didn't reach. "Honey," she said, and paused. Looked down at her hand on the fence post, then back up at me. "I need to talk to you about something. There's a specific way older people deliver bad news. They don't rush it. They circle around it first, testing the edges, giving you time to brace without knowing what you're bracing for." Mrs. Dwyer did that now. She smoothed the front of her blouse with her free hand and tilted her head slightly, the way you do when you're trying to find the gentlest angle into something sharp. "I don't want you to think I'm complaining," she said. "You've always been a wonderful neighbor. Very quiet, very respectful." "Thank you," I said, not sure where this was going. "But this past week, while you were away, I've been hearing some things from your house, at night." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how little sense it made. "I was in Colorado," I said. "Left Saturday, just got back last night. Nobody was at the house." She nodded like she'd expected me to say that, and that's when the first small wire of something cold threaded through my chest. She'd expected it. She already knew it didn't make sense, and she was telling me anyway. "That's what I thought," she said. "I saw you loading up your car that morning, but Monday night, or maybe it was Tuesday, I'm not sure about the first one, I started hearing movement, footsteps, like someone walking around, and then your TV was on. I could hear it through the wall. You know how thin these walls are. Not loud, just on. Late. After midnight." I stood there with my hand on the trash bin and felt the heat of the pavement soaking up through my shoes. "And it wasn't just one night," she continued. "It was several nights. At least 3, maybe 4. I'd hear the footsteps again, the TV again. One night I could swear I heard the back door. You know that sound it makes? That little scrape when it catches on the frame?" She demonstrated with her hand, a small pushing gesture. "That sound, around 1 in the morning. She knew the sound my back door made. Of course she did. She'd lived next to that door for decades, through however many tenants before me. She knew this house the way I did. By its sounds." "I almost called the police," she said, and her voice got quieter. "But I thought maybe you'd come home early. Or maybe you had a friend staying, someone looking after the place. I didn't want to cause a fuss over nothing." She looked at me with something that wasn't quite guilt, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Was there someone staying here?" "No," I said. My voice sounded normal, and I was surprised by that. "No, nobody had a key. Nobody was supposed to be here." She pressed her lips together and nodded again, slow. "Well," she said, "I just thought you should know." We stood there for a moment. The sprinkler down the street hissed its arc. A crow landed on the power line above us and sat there like a black period at the end of a sentence. I thanked her, told her I'd look into it. She patted my arm and went back inside, and I heard her screen door clap shut behind her. I stood in the driveway for another 30 seconds, not moving, just letting my brain run through the list of rational explanations. Pipes expanding and contracting in the heat. The TV, maybe I'd left it on a timer. I didn't have a timer, but maybe. An animal in the attic, raccoon maybe. The oak tree had branches that hung over the roof. And Mrs. Dwyer was getting older. Sounds travel at night, bounce off houses, play tricks. Maybe she heard the Hendersons' TV and thought it was mine. I went back inside and I told myself I was just going to do a quick check. Casual. Prove to myself that everything was fine, and then do my laundry and move on with my day. The front door had been locked when I came home. I'd used my key. I checked it again now. Deadbolt solid. No marks on the frame. Same with the side door off the kitchen, the one I never used. Locked, chain on. I moved to the windows. Living room, both locked. My bedroom, locked. Bathroom, that little frosted crank window, locked. Everything was fine. I almost stopped there. I want you to know that. I almost stopped, made myself a cup of coffee, and let the whole thing dissolve into a weird story I'd tell at parties. My elderly neighbors swore someone was in my house while I was on vacation. Creepy, right? Everyone laughs. You move on. But I didn't stop. Something Mrs. Dwyer said had lodged itself sideways in my brain and wouldn't lie flat. She'd said she heard the back door, that little scrape, and she'd described it perfectly, the exact sound it makes when the bottom edge catches on the threshold because the frame has warped slightly over the years. You'd only know that sound if you'd heard it 100 times. She wasn't guessing, so I kept looking. Not for signs of a break-in anymore, for signs of presence. The bathroom. My towel was on the wrong hook. I hang it on the left, always. Left hook, because the right one is closer to the shower and the towel gets damp from the steam if you leave it there. It was on the right. I stared at it for a long time. Tried to remember if I'd moved it before I left. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. The kitchen. A chair at the table was pulled out about 2 inches from where it should be. I eat at the counter, not the table. I hadn't sat in that chair in weeks. The spare bedroom. The blinds were tilted at a different angle. I keep them closed, slats down, to block the afternoon sun so the room doesn't turn into an oven. They were slats up now, letting light in from the bottom instead of the top. Someone had turned them. Each thing on its own was nothing. A towel, a chair, a set of blinds. I could rationalize every single one. I was rushing when I packed. I bumped the chair with my suitcase. Maybe the blinds had always been that way, and I was only noticing now because Mrs. Dwyer had put something paranoid in my head. I was standing in the spare bedroom doorway, almost ready to talk myself down from the ledge, when I glanced at the closet. The door was open a few inches. I always kept it closed. I walked over and pulled it open the rest of the way. On the floor of the closet, pushed against the back wall behind a stack of old shoeboxes, was a water bottle. A cheap plastic one, the kind you grab from a gas station cooler. Some off-brand I didn't recognize. Yellow label, generic mountain graphic. It was half empty, or half full, I suppose, depending on how you feel about strangers drinking water in your house while you sleep 1,000 miles away. I didn't touch it. I just looked at it. And the silence of the house pressed in around me like it was listening too. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that water bottle. Long enough that my legs started to ache from not moving. Long enough that the central air cycled off and the house went truly quiet. The kind of quiet that has texture, that feels like it's pressing against your eardrums. Then I picked it up, used a paper towel, pinched it by the cap. I didn't consciously decide to do that. Something in the back of my brain just said, don't touch it with your hands, the way you know things in dreams. I carried it to the kitchen counter and set it down and looked at it like it might explain itself. It didn't. I went back to the spare bedroom and started searching the way you search when you're no longer trying to prove yourself right. I was trying to prove myself wrong now. I wanted to find more. I needed the full shape of whatever this was because the not knowing was worse. This half state where maybe someone was in my house and maybe I'm just paranoid, and the water bottle fell out of a shopping bag 3 months ago, and I forgot. The closet first. I pulled everything out. Old coats, shoe boxes, a duffel bag I hadn't used since college. Nothing else that didn't belong. Then the rest of the room, under the desk, behind the door, in the corners. Clean. I moved to the guest bed, got on my knees and lifted the dust ruffle, the fabric brushing my forearm, and looked underneath with my phone flashlight. A phone charger cable. White, generic, slightly coiled. The kind that comes in every phone box and ends up in junk drawers. It was sitting on the carpet about a foot from the wall, right where it would be if someone had plugged it into the outlet behind the nightstand and let the cable trail down to the floor. Except I didn't own a white charger cable. Mine were all black. I bought a 3-pack on Amazon a year ago, all black, all accounted for. I pulled it out and held it under the light. The end was slightly dirty, a faint gray smudge on the connector. Worn, used, someone else's. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and tried to breathe normally. The mattress dipped under me, and I had the sudden, irrational thought that someone else had made this same dip recently, that the mattress remembered the weight of a stranger the way it remembered mine. I checked the windows in the room. The one facing the front yard, locked. The one facing the backyard. I turned the latch. It was unlocked. I stared at it. Tried it again, like maybe I'd done it wrong. Latch up, latch down, it was unlocked. This window faced the back of the house, partially hidden from the street by the oak tree. The branches hung low enough on that side that you'd have cover. You could stand there in the dark, and no one on the street would see you. If the latch wasn't engaged, you could slide that window open from outside with 2 fingers and a little patience. I always locked it. I locked every window before I left for Colorado. I remember doing it, walking through the house Saturday morning with my suitcase all ready by the front door, checking each one. A little ritual. This window had been locked when I left. I was sure of it. Someone had unlocked it from inside. I moved to the back door, the one Mrs. Dwyer had heard. I opened it and looked at the frame, the threshold where it scraped, and then I crouched down and looked at the strike plate on the door jamb. The screws were still in place, but the wood around them was chewed up. Fresh scratches in the paint, pale wood showing through where something had pried or forced or leveraged. Not a lot of damage. The kind of thing you'd never notice unless you were looking. Unless you were on your knees with your face 6 inches from the frame, which is where I was now, with my heart doing something it hadn't done before. Not racing exactly, but beating wrong, like it had forgotten the rhythm and was trying to find it again. I stood up and locked the back door, checked it twice, walked through the entire house one more time. Every room, every closet, even the utility closet with the water heater. I opened the shower curtain. I looked behind the couch. I did things that I would have found embarrassing an hour ago and now felt like the absolute bare minimum. The house was empty. I was alone. But someone had been here. The water bottle, the charger cable, the unlocked window, the scratches on the door frame. This wasn't pipes or raccoons or an old woman's imagination. Someone had entered my home, probably through the back door or that window, and they had stayed. They had slept in the guest bed. They had charged their phone. They had walked the hallways after midnight, turned on my TV, used my bathroom, drank water, and left the bottle behind like a receipt for a stay I never authorized. For a week. I called the non-emergency police line. A patrol car came out about 40 minutes later. One officer, mid-40s, polite in the way that told me he'd already decided this was nothing before he got out of the car. He walked through the house with me. I showed him the water bottle, the charger, the window, the door frame. He wrote things down in a little notepad. He tried the window latch a few times, looked at the scratches on the strike plate, and made a sound that was almost a word, but not quite. "Nothing's been stolen?" he asked. "Not that I can tell." "Any signs of forced entry? Broken glass? Kicked-in door?" "Just the scratches, and the window was unlocked." He nodded the way people nod when they're wrapping up. "Could be someone saw you leave and took the opportunity. Happens sometimes, especially in summer. Transients, kids, someone looking for a place to crash. They see an empty house. They try their luck." He clicked his pen. "I'd recommend changing your locks. Maybe get a camera. File a report if you want. But without prints or damage, there's not a whole lot we can do." He left. The patrol car pulled away, and I watched it go from the living room window and felt something I hadn't expected. Not fear, not yet, but abandonment. The machinery of safety had come and gone and left me exactly where I started, alone in a house that someone else had been living in. Night came. I didn't go anywhere. I told myself I wasn't going to let this run me out of my own home. I made dinner, pasta, something simple, and ate it standing up in the kitchen because sitting at the table with my back to the hallway felt impossible. I turned on every light, checked the locks again, checked the windows again, drew every curtain and blind. I went to bed at 11, lay there in the dark, listening to the house. Every sound had a question mark stapled to it now. The fridge cycling on, normal. The creak in the hallway near the bathroom. The creak that had been comforting 2 days ago. Was it settling, or was it weight? A foot on a floorboard. I listened to the oak tree's branches brushing the roof, the crickets outside, their rhythm steady and indifferent. Somewhere down the block, a car door closed. I tracked the silence after it, waiting for another sound that didn't come. Eventually, I slept. Lightly, in pieces, surfacing every hour or so to stare at the ceiling and listen. Mrs. Dwyer's words kept playing on a loop behind my eyes like subtitles I couldn't turn off. It went on quite a while. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen counter with coffee I'd made too strong, trying to figure out what to do next. The police weren't coming back. Nothing was stolen. On paper, nothing had even happened. Just some misplaced objects and an old woman's account of sounds she heard through a shared wall. But I couldn't let it go. It was the charger cable. The water bottle I could almost explain away, the towel and the chair and the blinds I could torture into coincidences. But the charger cable under the bed was someone's routine. You don't plug in your phone for a few minutes. You plug it in when you're settling in for the night, when you're staying. That's when I remembered the floodlight. I'd installed a motion-activated floodlight on the back of the house about 6 months after I moved in. Nothing fancy. One of those solar-charged units from the hardware store, maybe $40. It lit up the backyard when anything moved within about 20 feet of the back door. I'd gotten it because the oak tree made that corner of the yard pitch dark at night, and I'd nearly tripped over the garden hose twice. But the light had a feature I'd barely used. It logged activation times in a companion app on my phone. I hadn't opened that app in months. I pulled it up now. The app loaded slowly. A white screen, then a spinning wheel, then a list of dates with timestamps. Each entry was a motion event, the time the floodlight triggered, how long it stayed on, sometimes a tiny thumbnail from the built-in sensor that was too low resolution to show anything useful. Just shapes, light and dark, movement and stillness. I scrolled to the week I was gone. Saturday, the day I left. Nothing. The house going dark, going quiet. The yard empty. I imagined it from above, my car pulling out of the driveway that morning, the street settling into its usual rhythm, and my house sitting there with its doors locked and its windows closed and its rooms full of nothing but dust and the slow tick of the water heater. Sunday, 1 activation at 11:47 p.m., just one. Duration, 18 seconds. Could have been an animal, a cat, a possum, something cutting through the yard. I almost scrolled past it. Monday, 2 activations. 12:15 a.m., 1:33 a.m., both under 30 seconds. Tuesday, 3 activations, 11:52 p.m., 12:41 a.m., 2:08 a.m. Wednesday, 4, starting at 11:30 p.m., the last one at 3:17 a.m. Thursday, 5, Friday, 6. The numbers climbed like a staircase. Each night, more activations. Each night, the window of activity getting wider, stretching later and later into the morning. Whoever it was had been getting more comfortable, more confident, moving around the backyard more freely, spending more time outside, staying later, testing how much they could get away with. I sat at the kitchen counter and felt something rearrange itself inside my chest. Not fear, not yet. Something colder than fear, understanding, the kind that arrives too late and all at once, like realizing you've been driving the wrong direction for an hour. Someone hadn't just broken into my house while I was gone. They had moved in, and night by night they had settled. They'd found their rhythm. By Friday, they were walking the backyard at 3 in the morning like it was theirs. Then I scrolled to Saturday, the day before I came home. 3 activations. Normal, if anything about this was normal. But then I scrolled one more day. Sunday, The day I came home. 1 activation, 11:22 p.m. I had gone to bed at 10:30 that night. I remembered it clearly. The relief of my own pillow, the heavy sleep. At 11:22 p.m., I had been asleep in my bed for less than an hour, and the floodlight in my backyard went on. Someone had been in my backyard, while I was inside, while I was sleeping. My mouth went dry. I scrolled further, hands not quite steady. Monday, last night. The night after Mrs. Dwyer talked to me. The night I'd lain there, listening to every sound, checking every lock, convincing myself I was being paranoid. 3 activations. 1:47 a.m., 2:22 a.m., 3:05 a.m. Last night. They had come back last night, while I was inside, awake, afraid, listening to crickets and the fridge and the creak in the hallway. Someone was standing in my backyard, 3 separate times, moving around, maybe looking at the back door, maybe looking at the windows, maybe looking at the window in the spare bedroom, the one that didn't lock anymore because they'd already unlocked it from inside. I put the phone down and pressed my palms flat on the counter and breathed. The house was quiet. The fridge hummed. The central air ticked. Outside, a lawnmower droned somewhere far away, and the sound of it, so ordinary, so maddeningly normal, made everything inside me tighten. I stood up and went to the hallway closet, the one where I kept winter coats I didn't need for another 3 months. I hadn't checked it properly before. I'd opened it, glanced in, closed it. Now I pulled everything out. Coats on the floor, scarves, a box of old Christmas decorations. I reached to the back of the top shelf, sweeping my hand blindly across the wood, and my fingers touched fabric. I pulled it down. A blanket. Small, balled up, shoved against the wall behind the decorations where you'd never see it unless you emptied the whole shelf. It was gray fleece, pilled and worn. Not mine. I'd never seen it before. It smelled like someone. That's the detail that broke through everything. All the rationalizing, all the distance I'd tried to keep between myself and what was happening. The blanket smelled like a person. Stale sweat and something faintly chemical like cheap detergent or hand sanitizer. A human smell. Specific and wrong and in my house. Underneath where the blanket had been, on the shelf, I found a flathead screwdriver. The handle was scuffed, the tip slightly bent. It wasn't mine. I don't own a flathead screwdriver. I have a multi-bit set in the junk drawer, and that's it. I looked at the screwdriver and thought about the scratches on the back door strike plate. I thought about the unlocked window. I thought about how easy it would be to use a flathead to pop a simple latch, to pry a door frame just enough to slip the bolt. Tools of entry, stashed for next time, for the return trip, because that's what the floodlight log was telling me. They weren't done. They knew I was back, and they were still coming. Not to stay anymore, but to check, to circle, to stand in the dark under the oak tree and look at my windows and know I was inside. I didn't sleep in the house that night. I packed a bag with shaking hands, drove to my friend Marcus's place across town, and sat in his driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. Not because I was deciding whether to go in, because I kept looking in the rearview mirror, watching the street behind me, checking to see if headlights followed me out of the neighborhood. None did. But I watched anyway. I stayed at Marcus's for 3 nights. He didn't ask a lot of questions, which is maybe the best thing a friend can do when you show up at his door with a duffel bag and a face that's doing something you can't control. He gave me the spare room. I slept with the light on. Didn't tell him why. During the day, I went back to the house and worked on it like a job. Changed every lock. Front door, back door, side door. Deadbolts, new strike plates with 3-inch screws that bit into the studs, not just the frame. I installed cameras. 4 of them. Front porch, back door, the backyard facing the oak tree, and 1 inside the hallway pointed at the front entrance. Wireless, motion activated, linked to my phone. The setup took most of a day, and the whole time I was doing it, I kept pausing, listening, standing still in a room with a screwdriver in my hand, not the stranger's screwdriver, mine, and holding my breath for 2, 3, 4 seconds, waiting for a sound that didn't come. I filed a police report, went down to the station in person this time, sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights, and gave a statement to a detective who typed with 2 fingers and asked me twice if anything had been stolen. The report went into a system. Nobody called me after. No fingerprints were taken. No one came to look at the blanket, the water bottle, the charger cable, the screwdriver. Those items sat in a cardboard box on my kitchen counter for 2 weeks before I moved them to the top shelf of my bedroom closet. Evidence of nothing, officially. A box full of someone else's ordinary things that had become the worst objects I've ever owned. Before I moved back in fully, I went to see Mrs. Dwyer, knocked on her door on a Wednesday afternoon. She invited me in and made tea without asking if I wanted any, and we sat at her kitchen table, a small round table with a lace cloth and a bowl of butterscotch candies in the center. And I asked her to tell me everything again, all of it, every detail. She went through the same account, the footsteps, the television, the back door scraping, 3, maybe 4 nights, always after midnight. She told it the same way, in the same order, with the same careful certainty. And then she stopped, set her teacup down, looked at the table. "There's one thing I didn't mention before," she said. I waited. One of the nights, I think it was Thursday, because my show had just ended and I was getting ready for bed, I looked out my kitchen window, the one that faces your side of the house. She paused. Her fingers found the handle of her teacup and held it without lifting. Your kitchen light came on, and then off, then on again. "Like a switch," I said. "Like someone standing at the switch," she said. "Deciding." That word, deciding. It's been months now, and I still can't get past it. Not the image of someone in my kitchen. I'd already accepted that, as much as you can accept something like that. It was the idea that they stood at my light switch and thought about it, weighed something, made a choice, on and off and on. Were they checking the room? Were they looking for something? Or were they just standing in my kitchen in the middle of the night, flipping my light switch, because they could, because the house was theirs for the week and they wanted to feel it? I asked Mrs. Dwyer why she hadn't told me that part before. She looked at the butterscotch bowl and then at me, and her eyes were the clearest I'd ever seen them. "I didn't want to scare you, honey," she said, quietly, like she was sorry, like she'd been carrying it around for days, this image of my kitchen light going on and off, and had decided to give it to me only because I'd come back and asked. I still live in the house. I thought about moving, thought about it seriously for about 2 weeks, looked at listings, calculated whether I could break the lease, but something in me refused. It felt like losing, like whoever had stayed in my house for those 7 days would have taken one more thing from me. Not a TV or a laptop, but the feeling that a place was mine, that I could close a door and be safe behind it. I wasn't willing to give that up, not to someone who didn't even leave a name, so I stayed. But the house is different now, and I think it always will be. I check the cameras every morning before work, every night before bed. It's the first thing I do when I wake up, and the last thing I do before I close my eyes. Open the app, scan the feeds, check the motion log. The locks get tested 3 times each. I walk the rooms before I sleep. Not quickly, not casually, methodically. The way that officer walked through my house that first day, except I actually care about what I find. I sleep with my phone on the nightstand, volume up, the camera app set to send alerts for any motion on the backyard feed. There's a bat by the bedroom door, an old wooden Louisville Slugger that Marcus gave me as a half-joke that neither of us laughed at. I've never had to pick it up. I don't know what I'd do if I did, but it's there. The thing that stays with me. The thing I keep circling back to when it's late and the house is doing its house sounds and the oak tree is brushing the roof with its branches, isn't any single piece of evidence. It's not the water bottle or the blanket or the screwdriver. It's the floodlight log, specifically the entry from the night I came home. Sunday, 11:22 p.m. The night I slept in my own bed for the first time in a week, heavy and deep, face down on my pillow, dead to the world. Someone stood in my backyard at 11:22, 30 minutes after I fell asleep, close enough to see the back door, close enough to see the window, the one they'd already unlocked from inside. They knew I was home. My car was in the driveway. The lights had been on earlier that evening. They watched me come back, or they came to check, and they found me there. And they stood in the yard anyway, in the dark, under the oak tree, where the branches hang low enough to hide a person from the street. What were they doing? What were they deciding? I don't know. The police don't know. No one was ever caught. No one was ever identified. The floodlight log from the weeks after I installed the cameras shows nothing. No activations, no movement, no one coming back. Maybe they saw the cameras and moved on. Maybe they found another empty house on another quiet street with another oak tree and another window that doesn't latch right. Or maybe they're just waiting. Some nights I lie in bed and hear the floodlight click on. That faint electrical hum when the bulb activates, the glow leaking through the curtains and painting a pale rectangle on my bedroom ceiling. And I don't get up. I don't check the app. I don't look out the window. I just lie there, very still, and listen to the crickets and the creak in the hallway and the branches on the roof, and I wait for the light to click off again. It always does. 30 seconds of nothing, and then dark. But those 30 seconds last forever. And every time, I think the same thing. A thought so clean and simple it cuts straight through everything I've told myself about locks and cameras and baseball bats. What if, this time, the light doesn't turn off because something moved away? What if it turns off because something stopped moving? The mailman asked if I'd moved. Someone had filed a change of address form in my name to a P.O. box I've never heard of. When I was 27, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. That probably sounds dramatic, but if you've ever come out the other side of a long relationship that just slowly suffocated you, you know what I mean. 4 years with someone who made me feel like I was always doing something wrong. And then suddenly, nothing. Silence. Just me. I found this little bungalow on Carver Street in October. Tiny rental, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with yellow tile from the 70s that I should have hated, but somehow loved. The rent was low because the place was small and the neighborhood was quiet. The kind of quiet where you could hear sprinklers 2 houses down. Most of the street was older couples and retirees. My nearest neighbor, Dorothy, was in her 80s and went to bed before the sun finished setting. It was perfect for me. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which meant most of my days were spent at my desk by the front window, laptop open, coffee going cold beside me. I liked watching the street while I worked, the mail truck making its rounds, the same golden retriever getting walked at 3 p.m. every day, the occasional kid on a bike. It was mundane and predictable, and exactly what I needed after years of walking on eggshells. Those first few weeks felt like remembering how to breathe. I'd leave the window cracked while I worked, letting the cool autumn air drift in with the sound of rain tapping against the overhang. Some nights I'd fall asleep on the couch with the TV on low, rain pattering on the roof, and I'd wake up feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. I didn't have a security system. Didn't even think about it. The front door had a deadbolt, and the windows had those old twist locks, and that was enough. This was Carver Street. Nothing happened on Carver Street. One of the small pleasures of my routine was Greg, the mailman. He'd been on the route for probably 15 years, and he was one of those effortlessly friendly people who made you feel like you mattered even when he was just handing you a gas bill. We'd wave to each other every afternoon. Sometimes he'd stop and chat. Weather, the neighborhood, whatever. He remembered my name after the second day. Told me about the couple who'd lived in the house before me, how they'd retired to Arizona. Made me feel like I belonged somewhere, which I really needed at the time. My days had a rhythm I'd grown to love. Wake up around 7, make coffee, check emails, work until noon, eat lunch standing in the kitchen because I still hadn't bought a proper dining table. Back to work until 3 or 4. Walk to the mailbox, wave to Greg if the timing lined up. Cook something simple for dinner. Read or watch something, or just sit and listen to the rain if it was one of those nights. Lights off by 11. It was small. It was quiet. It was mine. I'd been living there about 6 weeks when Greg didn't just wave from the sidewalk. He stopped, walked up the driveway, stepped onto my porch, and knocked on the screen door with that half-apologetic look people get when they're about to give you bad news, but aren't sure it's actually bad. "Hey," he said. "Quick question. Did you move?" I laughed. I was standing right there. "I'm serious," he said, and the smile on his face faded just a little. "I got a change of address form filed under your name. Says you're forwarding everything to a P.O. box out in Ridgedale." I'd never heard of Ridgedale. I told him that, and he nodded slowly, like he'd been hoping I wouldn't say that. "Yeah," he said. "I figured I should ask before I just started sending your stuff somewhere else. The form looked legit, had your full name, your address, everything, but it didn't feel right." I stood there for a moment, rain dripping off the overhang behind him, and I didn't know what to say. My full name, my exact address, a P.O. box I'd never opened in a town I'd never been to. I thanked Greg, really thanked him, and told him not to forward anything. He said he'd flag it on his end and suggested I call the post office directly. I went back inside, locked the door behind me, and sat down at my desk. The rain was still tapping on the window, but it didn't sound the same. That soft, steady rhythm I'd fallen asleep to for weeks. It sounded like static now, like white noise filling the space where something important was trying to get through. I told myself it was probably a clerical error. Someone transposed a number, mixed up an address, whatever. It happens. People file change of address forms all the time, and things get crossed. That's all this was. But my hands were shaking when I picked up the phone to call USPS, and I couldn't stop thinking about what Greg had said, that it had my full name. Not just my first name, not a misspelling, not a variation, my full legal name, the one I don't put on social media, the one only my bank, my landlord, and the post office would have. Someone had it, someone I didn't know. I dialed the number and waited on hold, listening to the rain and trying very hard to believe this was nothing. The woman at USPS confirmed it in about 30 seconds. A change of address form had been submitted online 10 days earlier, redirecting all mail from my address to P.O. Box 1488 in Ridgedale, New Jersey. She read my full name back to me, my street address, my zip code, all correct, all perfect. Like someone had been staring at my driver's license when they filled it out. I asked her how that was possible. How could someone just redirect my mail without my permission? "It's an online form," she said, like that explained everything. "Anyone can submit one. There's a verification process, but..." She trailed off. I could hear her typing. "I can cancel it for you right now and flag the account. Do you want me to do that?" Yes. Obviously, yes. She canceled it and gave me a case number. Told me I could file a complaint with the Postal Inspection Service if I wanted to pursue it further. Her voice was flat, professional, already moving on to the next call in her head. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake her. Someone had stolen my mail, was stealing my mail for 10 days, and she sounded like I'd called to ask about a missing package. I hung up and sat there staring at the case number I'd scribbled on a post-it note. 10 days. For 10 days, someone in Ridgedale had been receiving my bank statements, my bills, my credit card offers, anything with my name on it. I hadn't even noticed because most of my bills were paperless and I'd been buried in a big client project all week. The mailbox had been empty and I'd just assumed, what, that the mail was light? That was the first moment I felt genuinely stupid. And it wouldn't be the last. Something told me to check my credit. I don't know why. Maybe because I'd read enough horror stories online about identity theft. Maybe because some part of my brain was already connecting dots I didn't want to see. I pulled up my bank's app first, scrolled through recent transactions. Everything looked normal. Then I logged into one of those free credit monitoring sites and ran a report. 2 new credit cards had been opened in my name. One was a Visa through a bank I'd never heard of, opened 8 days ago. The other was a store credit card for a home improvement chain, opened 5 days ago. Both had charges on them, small ones. A gas station for $14.32. A Walmart for $27.88. A streaming subscription for $15.99. Testing the waters, seeing if anyone would notice. Nobody had noticed, not until now. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I was going to be sick. I stood up from my desk and paced the kitchen, phone in hand, trying to figure out what to do first. The rain had picked up outside, hammering the windows in sheets, and the sound that used to feel like a blanket now felt like walls closing in, like it was sealing me inside while someone out there picked my life apart, piece by piece. I spent the next 4 hours on the phone, called the fraud departments for both credit cards, called my actual bank to put alerts on my accounts, called the credit bureaus to freeze my credit. Each call meant another hold, another automated menu, another person asking me to verify my identity, which felt like a sick joke because apparently anyone could be me now. Anyone with an internet connection and my full name. The fraud representative at the Visa company asked if I'd shared my personal information with anyone recently. I wanted to scream. No, I didn't share it. That's the whole point. Someone took it. By the time I finished the last call, it was dark outside. The rain had settled into a slow, steady drip. I hadn't eaten, hadn't worked, hadn't done anything but sit in my kitchen listening to hold music and repeating my social security number to strangers who sounded like they dealt with this 12 times a day, which, apparently, they did. Identity theft is common, ma'am. The next morning, I filed a police report. The officer who took it was polite, wrote everything down carefully, and told me they'd look into it. But the way he said it, measured, practiced, I knew what it meant. This was paperwork to him, a box to check. Nobody was going to knock down any doors over a couple of fraudulent credit cards and a redirected mailbox. I asked about the P.O. box. Could they find out who rented it? He said they'd need to submit a formal request to the post office, and that would take time. Weeks, maybe. He said it like weeks was a reasonable amount of time to wait while someone was out there living as me. I went home and tried to work. Couldn't focus. Kept refreshing my bank account, checking my credit report, Googling what to do if someone steals your identity, like the internet had answers the actual authorities didn't. Every article said the same things I'd already done. Freeze your credit, file reports, monitor your accounts. None of them addressed the part that was actually eating me alive. Someone knew my full legal name, knew my address, knew where I lived, and I had absolutely no idea who they were. 3 days later, I found something in my mailbox that made everything worse. It was a welcome packet from an apartment complex called Ridgedale Commons. A glossy little folder with a move-in checklist, a parking permit application, and a letter addressed to me congratulating me on my approved lease. Move-in date, December 1st. Someone hadn't just stolen my identity. They were building a life with it, a life in the same town as the P.O. box, 26 miles from where I was standing. I read that welcome letter 3 times, standing at the mailbox in the rain, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't a clerical error. This wasn't some faceless scammer in another state running credit card numbers. This was someone close, someone deliberate, someone who had looked at my life and decided to take it. I went inside, locked the door, checked the back door, checked every window, drew the blinds in every room, moved my desk away from the front window. For the first time since I'd moved to Carver Street, I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was being watched. And the worst part was, I had no idea how long it had been going on. I couldn't sleep that night. Lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling, listening to rain tap against the bedroom window and trying to convince myself that the sounds outside were just wind, just raccoons, just the old house settling. Every creak in the floor felt intentional. Every shadow that moved across the wall when a car passed felt like someone shifting just outside the glass. By morning, I'd made a decision. I was going to Ridgedale. I know how that sounds. I know it was probably stupid. But sitting in my house, waiting for the police to file paperwork while someone 26 miles away was signing leases in my name, I couldn't do it. I needed to see it. The P.O. box, the apartment complex, something. I needed this to feel real in a way that phone calls and case numbers didn't. Ridgedale was about 40 minutes east, a small town off the highway that I'd driven through maybe once in my life without stopping. The kind of place with a dollar store, a diner, and not much reason to visit. The post office was on the main road, a squat brick building with an American flag hanging limp in the drizzle. I sat in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes before going inside. Engine off, rain beating on the windshield, hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left in my life. I watched people come and go, an older man with a stack of packages, a woman with a stroller, a teenager in a hoodie checking a P.O. box near the entrance. Normal people doing normal things. I was the only one sitting in a car trying not to have a panic attack. When I finally went in, the clerk behind the counter was a heavy-set woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. I told her I wanted to report a P.O. box opened fraudulently in my name. Gave her the box number. She looked at me for a long moment, then typed something into her computer. "I can't release account information," she said. "Privacy policy. You'd need a court order or a law enforcement request." I expected that. I'd read it online, but I asked anyway, just in case. "Can you at least tell me if someone's been picking up mail from it?" She hesitated, glanced at the row of P.O. boxes along the far wall, then back at me. "Someone was in here maybe 20 minutes ago. Checked that box." She said it quietly, like she was bending a rule and wanted me to know it. 20 minutes. I'd missed them by 20 minutes. I sat in the parking lot again after that, scanning every car, every face, every person walking down the sidewalk, looking for someone who looked like they were carrying my life in their hands. But nobody stood out. Nobody looked suspicious. That was the thing I was starting to understand. Whoever was doing this didn't look like a criminal. They looked like everyone else. I drove past Ridgedale Commons on the way out of town. It was a mid-range apartment complex. Beige buildings, small balconies, a sign out front advertising one-bedrooms starting at $1,150. The kind of place I might have actually lived in. The kind of place someone chose because it was believable, because it fit me. That thought made my skin crawl in a way I still can't fully explain. It wasn't just that someone was using my name. It was that they were making choices as me. Picking an apartment I would pick, building a version of my life that made sense. Like they'd studied me. When I got home, I bought a security camera off Amazon. One of those cheap Wi-Fi ones with motion detection and night vision, $40. I set it up on the inside of my front window, angled to cover the porch and the mailbox. It felt like barely anything, a plastic eye the size of a coffee mug, but it was something, one small thing I could control. That night, I lay in bed and watched the live feed on my phone. The porch light made a small pool of yellow on the steps. Beyond that, the driveway, the street, and darkness. Rain fell through the light in thin, silver lines. Nothing moved. I watched until my eyes burned, then set the phone on my nightstand and stared at the ceiling until I fell asleep around 3 a.m. The next morning, I checked the camera's motion history, mostly expecting nothing. There were a few clips, a cat at 11:47 p.m., a car driving past at 1:20 a.m., and then one at 2:14 a.m. A figure standing at the end of my driveway, not walking past, not cutting through, standing, facing the house, completely still. The clip was 9 seconds long. The figure didn't move for the entire 9 seconds. They were too far from the porch light to make out details. Just a shape, dark clothing, a hood pulled up, rain falling around them. Standing there like they had all the time in the world. I watched it 4 times. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. 9 seconds of someone standing in the rain at 2:14 in the morning, staring at my house, at my windows, at the place where I sleep. I called the police. They sent an officer out, a different one this time. He watched the clip, wrote some notes, said they'd increase patrols in the area. He couldn't identify the figure. Too dark, too far, too blurry. Could have been anyone. Could have been anyone. That was supposed to make me feel better. That evening, I went to check the mail. I almost didn't. I'd started dreading the walk to the mailbox, which felt absurd given that it was 15 feet from my front door. But I made myself do it. Normalcy. Routine. Don't let them take that from you. Inside the mailbox was a manila envelope. No stamp, no postmark, no return address. Just my name, handwritten in neat block letters. I brought it inside before I opened it. Stood at the kitchen counter with the rain drumming hard on the roof above me and tore the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout, neatly formatted, like a schedule. 7:04 a.m. Wakes up. Kitchen light turns on. 7:11 a.m. Coffee maker starts. Stands at counter. 7:30 a.m. Moves to desk. Opens laptop. 12:15 p.m. Kitchen. Eats. Standing up. 3:45 p.m. Walks to mailbox. 6:20 p.m. Kitchen light on. Cooking. 10:50 p.m. Living room light off. Bedroom light on. 11:15 p.m. All lights off. My schedule, my exact schedule, down to the minute. Things you could only know if you'd been watching my house, carefully, patiently, for weeks. I put the paper down on the counter and backed away from it like it was something alive. My legs felt like they were made of water. My chest was so tight I couldn't get a full breath. This person hadn't just stolen my identity. They'd been standing outside my house, night after night, learning me, memorizing my patterns, watching my lights go on and off, counting the minutes between each one. And I'd been sitting inside the whole time, listening to the rain, thinking I was safe. I called my brother Marcus. Didn't text, didn't think about it, just called. He picked up on the second ring and I started talking and couldn't stop. The words came out in a rush, the change of address, the credit cards, the apartment in Ridgedale, the camera footage, the schedule, all of it pouring out of me in one long, breathless stream while I paced my kitchen in the dark because I'd stopped turning the lights on at night. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake. I didn't want to perform my routine for them anymore. Marcus didn't ask questions, didn't tell me I was overreacting. He just said, "I'm coming. Lock everything. I'll be there in 3 hours." He lived upstate. 3 hours felt like 30. I sat on the bathroom floor with the door locked while I waited, because the bathroom was the only room without windows. The rain was heavy that night. I could hear it hammering the roof, rushing through the gutters, drowning out every other sound. That was what scared me most. I couldn't hear anything over it. Couldn't hear footsteps on the porch. Couldn't hear the mailbox opening. Couldn't hear if someone was standing right outside the wall I was leaning against. Marcus got there around midnight. He's 6'2", played baseball in college, the kind of person who makes you feel safer just by being in the room. He checked every door, every window, every lock, moved furniture in front of the back door, set up the security camera at a better angle, lower, closer to the porch, pointed straight at the driveway. Then he sat on the couch with a baseball bat across his knees and told me to try to sleep. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with my phone open to the camera feed, watching the rain fall through the porch light, watching the empty driveway, watching nothing happen, and somehow being more terrified than I'd ever been in my life. 1:47 a.m. The motion alert lit up my phone. I sat up so fast I knocked it off the bed, fumbled for it on the floor, hands shaking, heart slamming against my ribs. Someone was at the mailbox. The camera had them. Clearer this time. The new angle caught them from the chest up. A man, dark jacket, hood up, but the porch light hit his face for just a second as he turned away from the mailbox. Just a flash. Enough. I ran to the living room. Marcus was already up, already moving. He'd heard the alert on his phone too. "Someone's out there," I whispered. He didn't whisper back. He grabbed the bat, threw open the front door, and went straight down the porch steps into the rain. No hesitation, just gone. I stood in the doorway, frozen, rain blowing in against my bare feet, watching my brother sprint down the driveway toward a figure that was already running. The man had bolted the second the door opened, fast, cutting hard to the left, disappearing between two houses across the street and into the darkness behind them. Marcus chased him for about a block before he lost him, came back soaked, breathing hard, bat still in his hand. He stood on the porch, dripping, and said, "He's gone. He went through someone's yard, and I lost him in the trees." I was shaking so hard I had to sit down right there on the porch. The rain was cold on my skin, and I didn't care. My brother sat down next to me, and neither of us said anything for a long time. The camera had caught his face, partially, a profile, a flash of light across his features before he turned away. Forehead, nose, the edge of a jawline. Not enough for the police to run through a database, but enough for me, because I'd seen that face before. It took me a few hours to place it. I was sitting at the kitchen table at 4 a.m., staring at the frozen frame on my laptop, zoomed in until the pixels blurred, and it hit me like a punch to the chest. 3 months ago, early September, right after I'd moved in, a man had knocked on my door on a weekday afternoon. Khaki pants, a polo shirt, a clipboard. Said he was from the electric company, needed to do a routine meter check. Friendly, professional, completely unremarkable. I'd let him in, not inside the house, but I'd let him walk around the side of the house, through the gate, into my backyard where the meter was. He'd been inside my fence. He'd walked past my bedroom window, my bathroom window, my back door. He'd seen the layout. He'd seen that there was no security camera, no alarm system, no dog, no sign that anyone else lived there. And he'd asked my name. To confirm the account, he'd said, and I gave it to him, my full name, first, middle initial, last, smiled while I did it. I sat there at 4 a.m. and replayed that interaction frame by frame in my head. How normal it had felt, how polite he'd been, how I'd watched him walk around the side of my house and thought nothing of it. Nothing at all. Went right back to my desk and kept working. He'd been planning this since September, 3 months. 3 months of watching, waiting, filing forms, opening accounts, building a second version of my life in a town down the highway. And it had all started because I opened my front door and gave a stranger my name. Marcus was watching me from across the table. "You okay?" he asked. I wasn't okay. I hadn't been okay for weeks. I just didn't know it until now. I moved out 4 days later. Didn't give notice, didn't wait for the lease to end, didn't even try to negotiate with the landlord. I just packed what I could fit in my car and left the rest. Marcus helped me carry boxes in the rain at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, and I didn't look back at the house when we pulled away. I couldn't. If I looked back, I'd see the porch, the mailbox, the driveway, where a man had stood in the dark and watched my windows, and I'd never stop seeing it. I stayed with Marcus and his wife for 2 months. Slept in their guest room with the door locked and a chair wedged under the handle, which I know made them uncomfortable, but they never said a word about it. Some nights I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and just lie there, listening. Rain on the roof, wind in the trees, normal sounds that didn't feel normal anymore. I'd check the locks on the front door 3, 4, 5 times before I could convince myself to go back to bed. Sometimes I couldn't convince myself at all. The police investigated. I'll give them that. With the camera footage and the manila envelope and everything I'd documented, they finally treated it like more than a paperwork crime. They pulled the rental agreement for the P.O. box. The ID used to open it was fake. A convincing fake, apparently, but fake. The name on it didn't match anyone in their system. The photo was grainy, taken from an angle that made it hard to run through recognition software. He'd paid in cash. No credit card trail, no digital footprint, nothing. The apartment complex in Ridgedale cooperated too. The application had been filled out using my social security number, my credit history, my employment information, details he'd pulled from the mail he'd been intercepting for 10 days. The leasing office said the man who came in to sign the paperwork was polite, well-dressed, totally normal. They didn't ask for much beyond the application and a security deposit. Cash, of course. Always cash. They never found him. The detective assigned to my case told me, very gently, that cases like this were difficult to close. The man had used burner phones, fake identification, and cash for everything. No real name, no traceable address, no digital trail. He existed in the system only as me, and once they shut that down, he disappeared, like smoke in the rain. I asked the detective what he thought the end game was, what this man had been building toward. Was it financial? Was he going to drain my accounts, max out credit cards, disappear with the money? Or was it something else? The detective paused for a long time before he answered. Honestly, I don't know. The financial piece was small, a few $100s in charges. That's not what this was about. He looked at me carefully. The surveillance, the schedule, the apartment in your name, that's not typical identity theft. That's something more personal. He didn't say what more personal meant. He didn't have to. I think about it every day. What December 1st would have looked like, the move-in date on that lease. Would he have been living there as me? Sleeping in an apartment rented under my name, getting my mail at his P.O. box, building a life that looked exactly like mine on paper? Or was the apartment just another step toward something I can't bring myself to imagine? I have a security system now. Cameras on every door, every window, motion sensors in the yard. I don't give my full name to anyone I don't know. Not delivery drivers, not repair workers, not the friendly woman at the front desk of my dentist's office. I spell my last name wrong on purpose for anything that isn't legal or financial. I check my credit report every single week. I still think about Greg, the mailman. If he hadn't stopped that afternoon, if he'd just processed the form like he was supposed to and started forwarding my mail to Ridgedale, I don't know how long it would have gone on before I noticed. Weeks, maybe months. Maybe long enough for that man to finish whatever he was building. Greg didn't have to walk up my driveway that day. He didn't have to knock on my door and ask. He could have just done his job and moved on. But something didn't feel right to him, and he listened to that feeling. He trusted his gut, and it might have saved my life. I'm telling this story because I want you to know how easy it was. A knock on the door, a clipboard, a polite smile, and a reasonable question. That's all it took. I gave a stranger my name, and he used it to try to become me, and I still don't know why. So if someone shows up at your door claiming to be from the electric company or the gas company or whoever, ask for ID. Call the company directly. Don't give them your name. Don't let them walk around your house. Don't be polite just because they seem friendly, because the scariest thing about this whole experience isn't what happened. It's how normal he looked when it started. A house down my street has been empty for 2 years. Last week the lights came on, and the curtains are the same pattern as mine. Every street has one. The house that just sits there. Nobody in it, nobody maintaining it, nobody caring. Grass gets long, the paint fades, the mailbox fills up and then stops filling up because even the junk mail gives up eventually. You walk past it every day, and after a while you stop seeing it. It's just background, part of the scenery. Ours was number 34. I live at number 22, about 6 houses down on the same side of the street. Been there since I was 25, me and my girlfriend at the time, then just me after she moved out. That was a whole thing I won't get into. Point is, I've been on Dunmore Road for about 3 years now, and number 34 has been empty for 2 of them. The guy who lived there before was an older man named Gerald. I didn't know him well, just the usual neighborly stuff. He'd nod when he was out getting his paper. I'd wave from my driveway. He kept to himself, kept his lawn neat, had these thick curtains in every window that he never seemed to open. One of those houses that always looked asleep. Then, one day, an ambulance showed up, and after that, I never saw Gerald again. Someone told me he'd gone into assisted living. Someone else said he'd passed. I never found out which one was true. After that, the house just emptied. Not all at once. Slowly. A for sale sign went up, stayed for a few months, came down. No one bought it. The lawn service stopped coming. The porch light burned out and nobody replaced it. By the time winter rolled around, it looked like the kind of house kids would dare each other to go up to on Halloween. Not falling apart, just forgotten. Blank windows. Dead quiet. I got used to it. We all did. Dunmore Road isn't a busy street. Maybe 15 houses, mostly working families, a couple retirees, one guy named Marco 3 doors down who restores motorcycles in his garage and always smells like engine grease. It's the kind of street where you know people's routines without meaning to. You know when the Hendersons leave for work because their truck has a bad starter and it takes 3 tries. You know the woman at number 19 walks her dog at exactly 6:15 every evening. You know number 34 is dark and empty and has been for a long time. I work construction, so I'm usually out the door by 6 a.m. and back by 4, sometimes 5 if the job runs late. Most evenings I'd come home, shower, make something to eat, sit on the couch and decompress. The kind of routine that sounds boring when you describe it but feels like armor when you're living it, especially after the breakup. Routines keep you from thinking too much. You just do the next thing, and then the next thing, and eventually it's late enough to go to sleep. The house was comfortable, nothing special. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, small kitchen with a window over the sink that looked out at the side yard. I'd put up curtains when I first moved in because the afternoon sun hit that window like a spotlight and turned the kitchen into an oven. Found this patterned set at a home goods store, dark blue with these little off-white geometric shapes, almost like overlapping diamonds. Not something I'd normally pick, but my girlfriend liked them and they blocked the light, so that was that. After she left, I kept them. Didn't see a reason to change. They were just curtains. Evenings were quiet on Dunmore. I liked sitting out on the front porch after dinner sometimes, just watching the street go dark. You could hear sprinklers clicking on, the occasional car passing through, rain hitting the pavement on the nights it came down. There was something grounding about it. The predictability, the sameness, every house doing its thing, every porch light clicking on at dusk except for 34, which stayed dark like a missing tooth in a row of lit windows. I'd lived with that gap in the street for so long that I stopped registering it. Number 34 was just the dark spot, the empty one, the house-shaped hole in the neighborhood. That's why I noticed immediately when the lights came on. It was a Wednesday night, maybe 9 p.m. I'd taken the trash out to the curb, pickup was Thursday morning, and I was walking back up the driveway when I glanced down the street the way you do, just scanning, not looking for anything. And there it was. A warm, yellow glow behind the front windows of number 34. Both of them. Steady, not flickering. Like someone had turned on a lamp in the living room and another one in what I assumed was the bedroom. I stood at the end of my driveway and stared at it for probably 30 seconds. It felt wrong the way a word looks wrong when you've stared at it too long. Something familiar suddenly not making sense. That house had been dark for 2 years, and now it wasn't. I told myself someone must have finally bought it, or the bank was doing something with it, or a realtor was staging it for showings. Any of those would make sense. Any of those would explain the lights. None of those explained the curtains, because even from 6 houses away, even in the dark, I could see the pattern in the front window. Dark blue with little off-white geometric shapes, overlapping diamonds. The same curtains I had in my kitchen. I almost walked down there. Almost. Had 1 foot off the driveway and then stopped myself. It was 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, dark, and I was going to walk up to a house I'd never been inside and... What? Knock? Press my face against the window and compare curtain patterns. I'd look insane. I'd look like the neighborhood creep. So I went back inside, locked the door, stood at my kitchen sink and looked at my own curtains, the blue ones with the off-white diamonds, and told myself I was being ridiculous. They were probably just similar. Stores carry thousands of the same pattern. It's not like I'd bought some one-of-a-kind fabric from an artisan in Portugal. They were clearance curtains from Home Goods, probably hanging in 100 kitchens across the state. I went to bed. Didn't think about it. That's not true. I thought about it the entire time I was lying there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain ticking against the bedroom window. But I didn't do anything about it, which felt close enough to not thinking about it. The next morning, I left for work at 6 like always. It was still dark. When I pulled out of my driveway, I looked down the street toward 34. The lights were off. House looked the same as it had for 2 years. Dark, still, empty. I felt a little foolish. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the streetlight had caught the windows at a weird angle. Maybe I was losing it. I got home that afternoon around 4:30, parked in the driveway, grabbed my lunch bag, walked to the front door, glanced down the street out of habit. The lights were on again, both front windows, same warm glow. And in the daylight, or what was left of it, the sky already going gray and heavy, I could see the curtains more clearly. Not just the front window now. The side window too, the one that faced the Hendersons' yard. Same pattern, dark blue, off-white diamonds. I stood on my porch and stared, longer this time, long enough that Marco came out of his garage, wiping his hands on a rag and said, "You good, man?" "Yeah," I said. "Hey, you notice anyone moving into 34? Marco looked down the street, squinted. 34? The dead guy's place? Gerald, yeah. Nah, haven't seen a truck or anything. He shrugged. Maybe the bank finally did something with it. About time. I nodded, went inside, made dinner, tried to watch TV, kept getting up and looking out the front window. The lights at 34 stayed on until sometime after 11, then went off all at once, like someone had flipped a breaker. The next day, I did something I'm not proud of. After work, instead of going straight home, I drove past 34, slowly. Not suspicious slow, just taking my time. The house looked different up close. The lawn was still dead and patchy. The for sale sign was gone, had been for over a year. The porch was dusty, covered in old leaves. No car in the driveway, no furniture visible through the gaps around the curtains. No welcome mat, no signs of someone actually living there, except the curtains, brand new, clean, pressed flat against the glass like someone had hung them that day. And they weren't just similar to mine. They were identical. The exact same pattern, the exact same shade of blue, the exact same diamond shapes and the exact same spacing. I know this because I'd looked at my own curtains for 3 years. I knew every repeat in the pattern, every place where the blue got slightly darker near the seam. These were the same curtains. That night I mentioned it to my buddy Travis on the phone. I kept my tone casual, didn't want to sound paranoid. Just said something like, "Weird thing, that empty house down my street has lights on now and whoever moved in has the same curtains as me." Travis laughed and said, "Maybe they've got taste." I laughed too. It sounded hollow. "You ever been inside that house?" he asked. "No, never." So maybe the old guy had the same ones. Maybe they've been there the whole time and you just couldn't see them. That was a reasonable explanation. Completely reasonable. Gerald could have bought the same curtains from the same store years before I did. The pattern wasn't unique. The store probably sold thousands of them. I just never noticed because Gerald always kept his curtains drawn and the house was dark, and I'd never had a reason to look closely. Except Gerald's curtains had been beige. I remembered that. Not clearly, not like I'd studied them, but somewhere in the back of my mind I had an image of beige fabric behind those front windows. Plain. No pattern. The kind of curtains an older man living alone would have. Functional, forgettable. Not dark blue with geometric diamonds. These were new. Someone had put them up recently. Someone had chosen the same curtains I had and hung them in an empty house 6 doors down from mine. I started paying closer attention after that. Every morning when I left, I'd check. Lights off, house dark. Every afternoon when I came home, lights on, curtains visible. The timing was consistent. Whoever was doing this was turning the lights on sometime during the day and off sometime late at night. But I never saw anyone go in or come out. Never saw a car. Never saw a shadow pass behind the curtains. The house just lit up and went dark, like it was breathing. Friday night, I was sitting on the porch after dinner, rain coming down light and steady, the street slick and shining under the lamps. I was watching 34, not hiding it anymore, just sitting there with a beer, looking. The lights were on, the curtains were glowing that warm amber from behind, and then one of the curtains moved. Not much, just a twitch at the edge, like someone had pulled it aside an inch and let it fall back. But I saw it, and in that half-second gap, I could have sworn I saw the outline of a shape behind the glass, someone standing at the window, looking down the street, toward my house. I didn't sleep much that night, kept going back and forth between the front window and the couch, checking every 20 minutes like that was going to change anything. The lights at 34 went off around midnight. The street went quiet. Rain kept falling. I sat in my living room in the dark and tried to convince myself that I hadn't seen what I saw. A curtain moved. So what? Could have been a draft. Could have been the fabric settling. Old houses shift. Air gets in through cracks. There are a dozen explanations for why a curtain might twitch in a window, and exactly 0 of them require a person standing behind it, watching me from 6 doors down in the dark. I told myself that. I told myself that all weekend. Saturday morning, I did something I should have done days ago. I walked down to 34, not at night, not creeping around. 10 a.m., broad daylight, the street busy with people mowing lawns and washing cars. Marco was in his garage. The Hendersons were loading their kids into their truck. Normal Saturday, normal everything. I walked up the front path like I belonged there. The porch steps creaked under my weight. Soft wood, no maintenance in 2 years. Leaves piled in the corners. A dead spider plant still hanging from a hook by the door. Just a pot of brown stems and dry soil. The front door was locked. I didn't try to open it, just checked. Peered through the gap between the door and the frame. Couldn't see much. Dark inside. Then I went to the front window, cupped my hands around my face and pressed against the glass, trying to see past the curtains. They were drawn tight, barely any gap, but through a sliver near the edge I could make out the living room. Empty, no furniture, no boxes, no lamps, just bare carpet and bare walls and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling fixture with no shade. But the curtains were there, hanging clean and new in a house full of nothing. I stepped back and looked at the window from the outside. The curtains filled both front windows, hung at exactly the same height, pressed flat. Whoever put them up had taken their time, measured, made it neat. In a house with no furniture, no belongings, no signs of life, someone had come in and carefully, deliberately hung curtains. My curtains. I walked around the side of the house. The grass was ankle-high, wet from the rain, soaking through my sneakers. I checked the side windows. Same curtains in one, blinds in another, one with nothing at all. The back of the house had a sliding glass door leading to a small concrete patio. I tried it. Locked. Looked inside. The kitchen. Empty. No appliances on the counters, no dishes, no towels, nothing. Except the kitchen window had curtains too. And I swear to God, my hands started shaking when I saw them, because they weren't just the same pattern as my kitchen curtains. They were hung the same way. Pulled to the left side, bunched and pinned with a clip, the way I'd done mine because the afternoon sun only came from one direction and I didn't need both panels closed. Someone had been inside my house, not physically. I didn't think that, not yet. But someone had seen my curtains, seen how I'd hung them, and replicated it. Exactly. I left, walked back up the street faster than I'd walked down. Marco called out something from his garage, but I didn't catch it. Went inside, locked the door, pulled my curtain shut in every room. Then I stood in my kitchen and looked at the curtain over the sink, the blue one with the diamonds pinned to the left, and felt my stomach turn over. I called the non-emergency police line, told them an abandoned house on my street appeared to have someone entering it, possibly squatting, asked if they could check it out. The dispatcher said they'd send someone by. 2 hours later, a patrol car rolled down the street, slowed in front of 34, and kept going. That was it. Nobody got out. Nobody knocked on the door. Nobody checked. I called Travis. This time I wasn't casual about it. "Someone's copying my house," I said. "The curtains, they're the same ones, hung the same way, in a house where nobody lives. I looked inside and there's nothing in there except the curtains. No furniture, no people, nothing. Just the curtains." Travis was quiet for a second. "Are you sure they're the same?" "I'm positive." "That's..." He didn't finish. Then, "Okay, that is weird. But maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe someone staged the house and used similar..." "There's no staging. There's nothing else inside. Just empty rooms and my curtains." Another pause. "What do you mean, your curtains?" "I mean the exact same ones. Same pattern, same color, same way they're hung. Travis, someone's been watching my house, close enough to see how I hang my curtains." He told me to call the cops again. I told him I already had. He said call again and be more specific. I said they'd think I was crazy. Some guy calling 911 because a house down the street has similar curtains. He didn't argue with that. That night, I sat in my living room with every blind closed and every light off. I didn't want to be visible. Didn't want anyone looking in, seeing me, seeing my house, seeing how I lived. The rain had picked up, heavy now, the kind that turns the gutters into rivers and fills the street with that constant rushing sound. I sat in the dark and listened to it and watched the faint glow of 34's windows through a crack in my blinds. The lights were on. The curtains were glowing. Around 10 p.m., I saw it again. The curtain in the front window pulled aside. Not a twitch this time, not subtle. Someone drew it back, held it open for 3 or 4 seconds, and let it fall. In those seconds, the light from behind the curtain spilled out onto the porch, and I could see a silhouette clearly. A person standing at the window, head angled slightly downward, not looking at the street, looking at my house, looking at me. I dropped below the windowsill. My heart was slamming so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I crouched there on my living room floor, back against the wall, rain hammering the roof, and I thought, they know I'm watching. They wanted me to see. I called the police again. This time, I called 911. Told the dispatcher someone was inside an abandoned house on my street and had been watching my home. She asked if I was in danger. I said I didn't know. She asked if the person had approached me or made threats. I said no. She said she'd send an officer. The patrol car showed up about 25 minutes later. By then, 34 was dark, lights off, curtains still, like the house had swallowed whatever was inside it and gone back to sleep. I watched from my porch as 2 officers walked up to the front door with flashlights. They knocked, waited, knocked again. One walked around the side while the other tried to look through the windows. They came back to their car, and one of them walked over to me. "House appears empty, sir. Doors are locked. No signs of forced entry. No one responded." "Someone was in there," I said. "The lights were on 20 minutes ago. I saw someone standing in the window." He nodded in that way cops do when they're being patient with you. Could have been a reflection, street light, headlights, that kind of thing. These old houses, the windows catch light in weird ways. "The curtains," I said. "Someone hung curtains in there, new ones. The house has been empty for 2 years." He looked back at 34, then at me. "Are you the homeowner?" "No, I'm at 22, down the street." "Is the property owner aware of your concerns?" I didn't know who owned the property. Didn't know if it was Gerald's family, a bank, a management company. I had no idea. The officer told me they couldn't enter without probable cause or the owner's permission, that I could try contacting the property owner, and that I should call back if I observed any criminal activity in progress. They left. I stood on my porch in the rain and watched their taillights disappear around the corner and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Completely, totally alone. The next day was Sunday. I barely slept. Got up early, drank too much coffee, paced my house. Around noon, I went to Marco's garage. Told him everything, the curtains, the lights, The figure in the window, the cops doing nothing. He listened with his arms crossed, grease rag over his shoulder, not interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Show me." We walked down together. Broad daylight again, street quiet. Marco brought a flashlight even though it was noon, which I appreciated. We went up to the front window and he pressed his face to the glass the way I had the day before. "I can't see much," he said. "Curtains are in the way." He stepped back and looked at them. Then he looked at me. "Those do look like yours." "They are mine, same ones." He frowned. "Let's check the back." We went around to the sliding glass door. Marco tried it, locked, same as before. But then he crouched down and pointed at the track. The metal rail that the door slides along. There were scratches on it, fresh, silver bright against the dull aluminum. And the lock latch, the little lever you flip to secure the door. It was in the locked position, but the housing around it was loose, wobbling, like someone had forced it, popped it open, gone inside, and then locked it behind them when they left. "Someone's been getting in through here," Marco said. Not a question. We didn't go inside. Marco said we shouldn't. Said if it was a squatter situation, we didn't know what we'd find. And if it was something else, we didn't want to contaminate anything for the police. He was right, but standing there, looking through the glass door into that empty kitchen with those carefully hung curtains, my pattern, my arrangement, I felt something crawl up the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. We walked back to my house. Marco came inside to grab a water. He was standing in my kitchen, leaning against the counter, and I saw his eyes go to the window above the sink, to my curtains, pinned to the left, blue with off-white diamonds. Then his eyes moved down. "Hey," he said, "your window lock's busted." I turned around. The kitchen window above the sink, the one with the curtains, had a latch lock at the top of the lower pane. A simple twist lock, the kind you flip 90 degrees. I walked over and looked at it. The lock was in the closed position, but the metal around it was bent slightly outward. Not a lot, just enough. And on the windowsill, in the thin layer of dust that collects on surfaces you never touch, there were marks, faint lines where something, fingers, a tool, I don't know, had disturbed the dust, not smeared it, pressed into it. 4 thin impressions, evenly spaced. Someone had opened this window, from the outside. I stood there staring at those marks, and the room tilted. Everything I'd been thinking, that someone was in number 34 watching me, that someone had copied my curtains from the outside, that this was creepy but distant, 6 houses away, happening over there. All of that collapsed. They hadn't just been watching from down the street. They'd been inside my house, close enough to see how the curtains were hung from the inside, close enough to see the clip I used to pin them to the left, close enough to stand in my kitchen, look at the pattern, memorize every detail, and then walk 6 doors down to an empty house and recreate it. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, my phone, told Marco I was leaving. He didn't ask where, just said, "I'll call the cops again. Go." I drove to Travis's place and didn't come back for 3 days. Marco called the police while I was driving. This time they actually went inside number 34. I don't know if Marco was more persuasive than I was, or if they just finally took it seriously. But they got the property management company to authorize entry. Travis told me what they found, because I couldn't bring myself to go back and ask. The house was empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, no food wrappers, no sleeping bag, no signs someone had been living there. Just bare rooms, dust on the floor, and the curtains. Hanging in 5 windows throughout the house, every single one the same pattern. Dark blue, off-white diamonds. Brand new. They found the sliding glass door had been tampered with, confirmed what Marco and I had seen. Someone had been entering through the back, relocking it behind them. There were no fingerprints on anything they tested. Whoever it was had been careful, patient, methodical. The officer who spoke to Marco used the word deliberate. Said it didn't look like squatting. Said it looked like someone was using the house for a specific purpose. They never said what that purpose was. I don't think they knew. The police checked my house too, while I was gone. Marco let them in with the spare key I kept under the grill. Something I've never done again, by the way. They confirmed the kitchen window had been compromised. The lock was bent in a way consistent with someone prying it open from outside with a flathead tool. They dusted for prints around the window frame and the sill. Nothing. Clean. They couldn't tell me how many times someone had been inside. Couldn't tell me when it started. Couldn't tell me if they'd been there once or 50 times. All they could confirm was that someone had entered my home through the kitchen window, and that same someone, or someone connected to them, had been entering number 34 and hanging curtains identical to mine. That's it. That's all they had. I stayed at Travis's for a week. During that time, I had a locksmith replace every lock in the house. New deadbolts, new window latches, security bar on the sliding door in the back. Had a camera system installed. 4 cameras, full coverage, motion alerts to my phone. Marco checked on the house every day while I was gone and reported back. Nothing happened. No lights at 34, no movement, no visitors. When I finally went home, I pulled into the driveway and sat in my truck for 10 minutes. The house looked the same. My house, my porch, my front door, my windows. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like something I was sharing with someone I'd never met and couldn't find. The first thing I did was take down the curtains, every single one. Ripped them off the rods, shoved them in a garbage bag, and threw them in the dumpster behind the gas station on Route 9. I don't know why that felt necessary. The curtains weren't the problem, I knew that. But I couldn't look at them anymore. Couldn't stand in my kitchen and see that blue fabric and those diamond shapes and not think about someone standing in that same spot, studying them, memorizing them, taking that information 6 houses down and recreating it in the dark. I put up blinds, plain white, no pattern, nothing worth copying. Number 34 went dark again after that. Whatever presence had been there, whatever ritual or obsession or game it was, stopped. The police told me they'd increase patrols on the street for a few weeks, and to their credit, they did. I'd see a car roll through once or twice a night. After a month, that stopped too. I still live on Dunmore Road. I've thought about moving, thought about it a lot actually, but I can't afford to break my lease, and part of me refuses to let someone run me out of my own home. Travis says that's stubborn. Marco says that's stupid. They're probably both right. But I've changed. I check my cameras every morning and every night. I check my window locks before bed, every single one, every single night, in the same order, like a prayer. I don't sit on the porch after dark anymore. I don't leave windows cracked even in summer. I sleep lighter than I used to, and some nights I don't sleep at all. Marco told me recently that a property company is finally renovating 34. New owners, apparently. He said they gutted the interior, ripped out the old carpet, replaced the windows. When the workers went in, they found the curtains still hanging. The foreman asked Marco if he knew anything about them. Marco said no. I don't know who was in that house. I don't know who was in mine. I don't know if they watched me sleep or went through my things or stood in my kitchen at 3 a.m. while I was unconscious 20 feet away. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know if the curtains were a message, a trophy, a rehearsal for something worse. I don't know if they're done. That's the part I can't get past. Not the break-in, not the curtains, not the silhouette in the window. It's the not knowing. It's lying in bed at night, rain tapping against the new blinds, cameras recording, locks checked 3 times, and still not knowing if the person who stood in my kitchen and memorized my curtains is out there somewhere, watching a different house, learning a different pattern. Or if they're still watching mine. My landlord said the previous tenant hadn't actually moved out. They just stopped answering the door one day. The first thing Gil told me about the apartment was that the water pressure was incredible. The second thing he told me, leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed while I signed the lease on the other side, was that the previous tenant hadn't actually moved out. He said it like that, casually, the way you'd mention a quirk about the plumbing or a neighbor who plays guitar on weekends. Just a thing to know. "What do you mean they didn't move out?" I asked, pen still touching paper. Gil shrugged. He was mid-50s, thick around the middle, with a gray mustache that made him look like someone's uncle at a barbecue. He owned 4 units in the building, a converted Victorian on a tree-lined block in the kind of neighborhood that was halfway between up-and-coming and giving up. My unit was the second floor, 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors that sloped slightly toward the windows, crown molding that had been painted over so many times the edges were soft. "Nora," he said. "Nora Feltz." She'd been here about 3 years, quiet, paid on time mostly. Then around February, she just stopped. Stopped answering when I knocked, stopped picking up calls. Rent didn't come in March. I gave her the proper notice, waited the legal window, and let myself in. He looked around the apartment like he was remembering it in its previous state. Place was half cleared out, some furniture gone, some still here, clothes in the closet, dishes in the sink, like she'd started packing and then just didn't finish. I looked at the apartment. Freshly painted, I could still smell it, that latex sweetness hanging in the air. The floors had been cleaned, but not refinished, and in the afternoon light from the bay windows I could see faint scuff trails where furniture had been dragged. The kitchen had been scrubbed, but the grout between the backsplash tiles was dark in places, the kind of staining that takes years to accumulate, and no amount of bleach fully removes. "Did you hear from her after that?" I asked. "Nope." Tried the emergency contact on her application, sister in Delaware. Number was disconnected. Forwarding address she'd listed when she first moved in was a P.O. box that had been closed. He pushed off the counter and adjusted his belt. I held her deposit for the damage, cleared out what was left, and listed the unit. "That's about it." He said that's about it, the way people say it when they want something to be about it. A door closing on a conversation. I should have asked more questions. I should have asked what he meant by damage. I should have asked where exactly in the apartment her things had been, what was in the dishes in the sink, whether 3 years of someone's life had really boiled down to a disconnected phone number and a closed P.O. box. But I was 29 years old, and this was the first apartment I'd found in 6 weeks of looking that I could actually afford, and the bay windows threw golden light across the hardwood in a way that made the whole place feel like a painting. So I signed the lease, and Gil gave me 2 keys, one for the front entrance, one for the unit, and shook my hand with a grip that was firmer than I expected. "Welcome home," he said, and left. I moved in on a Saturday in late October. My friend Priya helped me carry boxes up the narrow staircase, which turned at a sharp angle between the first and second floor, and had a banister that wobbled if you leaned on it. The building was old in a way that felt honest. It didn't pretend to be renovated. The hallway wallpaper had a faded floral print. The staircase creaked on every 3rd step. The radiators clanked when the heat kicked on, a deep metallic ticking that sounded like someone tapping a wrench against a pipe somewhere below you. The apartment itself was bigger than I expected. The living room was generous, anchored by the bay windows that looked out over the street. The kitchen was small but had a gas stove, which I cared about more than I probably should have. The bathroom was at the end of a short hallway, and next to it was the second bedroom, which I planned to use as an office. The main bedroom sat at the back of the apartment, facing the rear of the building, a small courtyard of cracked concrete and overgrown hedges, and beyond that, the back wall of another building. Priya and I spent the afternoon unpacking the essentials. She left around 7, and I ordered Thai food and sat on the living room floor surrounded by half-open boxes, eating pad see ew out of the container with a fork I'd had to dig out of a box labeled Kitchen, M-I-S-C. The radiator ticked. The building settled around me with small sounds. A door somewhere below, footsteps on the stairs that faded, the creak of old wood adjusting to the temperature drop outside. October in this part of the state meant the warmth left fast after sundown, and by 8 o'clock the windows were cold to the touch. I liked it. I did. The apartment had that specific energy of a blank slate. My boxes, my things, my life about to be arranged into a new shape inside these walls. Fresh paint, golden light, hardwood floors. It was exactly what I needed. But there were two things I noticed that first night, before I'd even unrolled the air mattress I'd be sleeping on until my bed frame arrived. The first was the closet in the second bedroom, my office to be. I opened it to check the shelf space and found, pushed into the far back corner on the top shelf, a small cardboard box, unlabeled. I assumed Gil's crew had missed it during the clean-out. I pulled it down and opened it. Inside were a few items, a set of keys on a plain ring, not the same cut as the ones Gil had given me, a half-used book of stamps, a small pocket notebook with a dark blue cover, and a single photograph. The photo showed a woman standing in what I realized with a slow lurch of recognition was this apartment, this room. She was standing in front of the bay windows in the living room, late afternoon light behind her, smiling at whoever held the camera. She looked about my age, brown hair, thin face, a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows. On the back, in neat handwriting, Nora, November 2021. The second thing I noticed was the lock on the front door. Both locks, the knob and the deadbolt, were the same ones Gil had given me keys to, which meant they were new. But around the deadbolt, the wood of the door frame was chewed up. Deep gouges, like someone had gone at it with a knife or a screwdriver, dug into the frame in short, frantic strokes. The fresh paint almost covered it. Almost. But if you ran your fingers along the frame, you could feel the damage underneath, ragged and deep, like the wood had been clawed at from the inside. I told myself the gouges were from a break-in attempt. Somebody tried to force the lock, failed, and that's why Gil had replaced them. Made sense. Old building, old neighborhood, it happens. The fact that the marks were on the inside of the frame, well, I'd looked at them in bad light. On an air mattress after a long day of moving, I probably had the angle wrong. That's what I told myself on Saturday night, and again on Sunday morning. And by Monday, I'd mostly committed to the explanation. Mostly. The first week in a new apartment is its own kind of strange. Everything is discovery. You learn which cabinets stick and which floorboards talk. You learn the rhythms of the building. The couple on the first floor who watched TV until midnight, the front door downstairs that slammed if you didn't catch it, the radiators that clanked in sequence like some slow mechanical conversation happening in the walls. I learned that the bathroom faucet ran cold for exactly 40 seconds before the hot came through. I learned that the bay windows in the living room rattled when the wind came from the north. I learned that the second bedroom, my office, was always colder than the rest of the apartment by 3 or 4 degrees, no matter what the thermostat said. And I learned about the notebook. I hadn't opened it that first night. The box from Nora's closet sat on my desk for 2 days before I touched it again. I'd thought about calling Gil, telling him his crew had missed some of the previous tenants' things. But something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe. Or something less comfortable than curiosity. The photo of Nora standing in my living room, smiling in my light, had done something I didn't expect. It had made the apartment feel shared. Not haunted, nothing like that, just occupied. Like the fresh paint was a lie the walls were telling, and underneath it, 3 years of someone else's life were still breathing. I opened the notebook on a Tuesday evening. I was at my desk in the office, procrastinating on a freelance project, and the box was right there. The notebook was small, pocket-sized, maybe 5 by 3 inches. Dark blue cover, no brand name. The pages inside were lined, and about a third of them had been written on. It wasn't a diary, Not exactly. It was more like a log. Dates in the left margin, short entries to the right. Some were mundane, grocery lists, phone numbers without names, a reminder to call someone about a dentist appointment. But others were different. December 4th. Heard it again. 3 a.m. Same wall. December 12th. Checked with Gil. He says there's nothing behind the wall, just insulation and the exterior. Says the building makes noise when it's cold. January 3rd. It's not the building. January 15th. Knocked back. 3 times. Nothing for an hour. Then 3 knocks back. Same rhythm. I read that entry twice. Then I closed the notebook and sat there with my hands flat on the desk, listening to the apartment. The radiator ticked. The wind pressed against the bay windows. Somewhere below me, a door closed. Same wall. She didn't say which wall. I looked around the office. 4 walls, one with the window facing the courtyard, one with the closet, one shared with the hallway, and one that was the exterior wall of the building. The back wall. The one my desk was pushed against. I put my palm against it. Cool plaster, smooth under the paint. I didn't know what I expected to feel. A vibration, a heartbeat, some residue of whatever Nora had heard. There was nothing. Just wall. I opened the notebook again and kept reading. January 22nd. Couldn't sleep. Sat in the office until 4. The sound comes from low on the wall, near the baseboard. Not knocking anymore, more like dragging. Something being pulled across a surface on the other side. February 1st. Called Gil again. He came up, put his ear to the wall, heard nothing. Told me it's probably rats. Offered to put traps in the basement. I said fine. He looked at me like I was wasting his time. February 8th. It's not rats. Rats don't knock. February 14th. I put tape over the baseboard where the sound is loudest. Painter's tape, a big X, so I'd know I wasn't imagining the location. Went to bed. Woke up at 2 a.m. The sound was coming from the same spot, right behind the X. February 19th. This entry was crossed out, then rewritten below it. I don't think it's behind the wall. I think it's in the wall. The entries after that changed. The handwriting got smaller, tighter, like she was trying to fit more onto each line. The dates got closer together. Every day, sometimes twice a day. February 22nd. Measured the office, then measured the hallway outside. The numbers don't match. The office is 2 feet shorter than it should be. There's space behind the back wall. Unaccounted space. February 24th. Told Priya. She said old buildings have weird layouts. Dead space for plumbing, electrical. She's probably right. I stopped reading. Priya. My friend's name was Priya. The same Priya who'd helped me move in. She was the previous tenant's friend too? No, that was impossible. Priya was common enough. It was a coincidence, had to be. I kept going. February 28th. Put my ear to the wall at 3 a.m. Not dragging, breathing. Slow, even breathing. On the other side of the plaster, something is breathing. March 3rd. Gil won't return my calls. March 5th. I'm going to open the wall. That was the last entry. March 5th. After that, the remaining pages were blank, clean and white and empty, like the notebook had simply run out of things to say. I sat at my desk in the cold office with Nora's notebook open to that final page and listened to the apartment. The radiator had gone quiet. The wind had stopped. The building was holding its breath, or I was, and the back wall sat 2 feet behind me, smooth and freshly painted and absolutely silent. I turned around and looked at it. Looked at the baseboard where Nora had put her X of painter's tape. The tape was gone. Painted over, probably. But I could see, now that I was looking, a faint rectangular outline in the paint near the floor. About 2 feet wide, maybe 3 feet tall. Like a seam. Like something had been cut and patched and painted over. Like a hole that someone had opened and someone else had closed. I told myself I wasn't going to measure the room. I told myself that for about 4 hours. Then, at 11 that night, I got a tape measure from the toolbox I hadn't fully unpacked yet and walked into the office. The room was 10 feet 8 inches from the window wall to the back wall. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper. Then I went into the hallway, stood at the point where the office wall should end, and measured from there to the exterior of the building. I had to go outside for the last part, down the creaking stairs, through the front entrance, around the side of the building to the back. The courtyard was dark. The hedges were overgrown enough that I had to push through them to reach the rear wall. The brick was cold and rough under my hand. I measured from the corner of the building to the point directly behind my office. 14 feet 2 inches. The office was 10 feet 8 inches. The wall itself, plaster, lath, insulation, brick, should account for maybe 12 to 14 inches total. That left roughly 2 feet unaccounted for. 22 inches of space that existed in the building, but not in any room. A gap between the back of my office and the exterior wall that had no reason to be there. I stood in the courtyard, looking up at the back of the building. My office window was dark. I'd turned the light off before coming outside. The window next to it, the bathroom, had its frosted glass glowing faintly from the nightlight I kept plugged in. Between those two windows and the far corner of the building, it was a stretch of brick wall with no windows at all, about 6 feet wide. Behind that brick, behind whatever was behind it, was the space the tape measure couldn't explain. I went back inside, locked the front door, climbed the stairs, stood in my office doorway and looked at the back wall, that smooth, freshly painted surface with the faint rectangular outline near the baseboard that I now couldn't stop seeing. I didn't open it, not that night. I got into bed in the main bedroom and lay there listening. The radiator ticked. The building made its sounds. And from somewhere deep in the walls, or maybe from nowhere, maybe from my own pulse magnified by the silence and Nora's notebook and the 2 feet of dark I now knew existed behind my desk, I thought I heard something slow and rhythmic, like breathing, like the building inhaling and holding it and letting go. I didn't sleep well. The next day I called Gil. He picked up on the 4th ring, sounding like I'd interrupted something. "Hey, Gil, quick question about the apartment. The back wall in the 2nd bedroom, is there dead space behind it? Like a gap between the wall and the exterior?" Silence. Not a long silence, but a specific one. The kind where someone is choosing which version of the truth to give you. "Old building," he said. "These Victorians, they've got all kinds of weird pockets. Used to be a chimney chase back there, I think. Sealed up years ago. Why?" "I found some things the previous tenant left behind. A notebook. She mentions hearing sounds from that wall." Another silence. Shorter this time, but heavier. "Nora had some issues," he said. His voice had changed. Not unkind, but careful. Measured. "She was a good tenant for a long time, but toward the end she got a little fixated. On the building, on noises. I sent an exterminator. I checked the wall myself. There was nothing there. She was going through something, personal stuff, I think. That's part of why she left. She didn't leave, Gil. You told me she stopped answering the door." "Right, yeah. She stopped engaging, stopped communicating. And then, when I let myself in, she was gone, and half her stuff was still there. Look, I'm not saying anything bad about her. She was dealing with something, and she handled it by leaving. People do that. He asked if there was anything else. I said no. He told me to call if the radiator gave me trouble, and hung up. I sat on the couch and thought about his voice when I mentioned the wall. That pause, that careful, measured tone people use when they're managing you, when they want you to feel reassured without actually reassuring you of anything. That night, I couldn't stay away from the office. I sat at my desk with the light on and my laptop open to nothing, pretending to work while I listened. The apartment was quiet. The radiator was off. The heat cycled in intervals, and this was the gap between them. The building settled around me in its usual language of creaks and sighs. At 1:40 a.m., I heard it. Not loud, not sudden. It came in so gently that at first I thought it was my own breathing reflected back at me off the wall. A low, rhythmic sound, soft and steady, with a cadence that was almost biological, like lungs filling and emptying on the other side of the plaster. I held my breath to make sure it wasn't me, sat perfectly still with my hands frozen on the keyboard and my chest locked. The sound continued, in and out, slow and patient, like whatever was making it had been doing this for a long time and wasn't in any hurry. I turned my head and looked at the back wall, at the faint rectangle near the baseboard, at the smooth paint that covered whatever Nora had found when she opened it, and whatever Gil had sealed shut after she disappeared. The sound stopped. Not gradually, all at once, like someone on the other side had realized I was listening. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I got up from the desk slowly. My chair rolled back and bumped the wall with a soft thud, and I flinched so hard my teeth clipped together. I backed out of the room without turning around, stepped into the hallway, pulled the office door closed. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, breathing. The apartment was silent. The radiator kicked on with its usual clank, and the normalcy of the sound made me want to cry. I went to bed. I did not go back in the office that night, but I left my tape measure on the desk. And sometime around 3 a.m, lying in the dark in my bedroom at the front of the apartment with 2 closed doors between me and that back wall, I heard 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced, coming from deep inside the building, from a direction I couldn't pinpoint but didn't need to. I didn't knock back. I lasted 2 more days before I opened the wall. 2 days of not going into the office. 2 days of leaving that door closed and walking past it in the hallway like it was someone else's room. I slept badly both nights, not because I heard anything, but because of the specific silence that had replaced the sounds. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like the building knew I was paying attention and had decided to wait me out. On the second day, I went to the hardware store 4 blocks from the apartment, bought a utility knife, a pry bar, a flashlight, and a dust mask. The cashier didn't look twice. People buy tools. It doesn't mean anything. I carried them home in a plastic bag and set them on the kitchen counter and looked at them for a long time. I called Priya, told her some of it, not all of it, because saying all of it out loud would have made me sound like exactly the kind of person Gil had described Nora becoming. Fixated, going through something. I told her I'd found the previous tenant's notebook, that the woman had heard sounds in the walls, that there was a sealed-up space behind the office that didn't match the building's exterior measurements. Priya was quiet for a moment. "And you're hearing things too?" "I heard something. Once, maybe twice. Old buildings make sounds. You know that." "I know." "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to open it and look." She told me to call her after. The way she said it, calm, practical, a little worried but not enough to argue, made me feel both better and worse. Better because someone knew. Worse, because she clearly thought this was grief or stress or the particular kind of urban loneliness that makes you hear things in empty rooms at 3 in the morning. I waited until the next evening, a Wednesday. It was dark by 5:30. November had settled in fully, and the early dark made the apartment feel smaller, the walls closer. I turned on every light, put on music, something with no lyrics, just piano, because I needed sound that I controlled. Then I went into the office, moved the desk away from the back wall, and crouched down in front of the rectangular outline near the baseboard. Up close, it was more obvious than I'd realized. The paint had been applied thickly, 2 coats, maybe 3, but the seam underneath was unmistakable. A clean line, about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, where something had been cut through the plaster and lath, and then patched with drywall compound and painted over. Whoever had done it had done a decent job. From across the room, you'd never notice, but on your knees with a flashlight, you could see the slight difference in texture. The hairline crack where the new material met the old. I put the blade of the utility knife against the seam and cut. The paint split with a faint tearing sound, and fine white dust sifted down onto the baseboard. I traced the rectangle, top, side, bottom, other side. Then I worked the pry bar into the edge and pulled. The patch came away in one piece. Drywall compound over a rectangle of plywood that had been friction fit into the opening. Behind it was dark. The flashlight beam hit the inside of the space, and I saw brick, the exterior wall of the building, about 2 feet back from the opening. The space between the office wall and the exterior was exactly what the tape measure had predicted, a narrow gap, roughly 2 feet deep, running the width of the room. The floor was the same hardwood as the rest of the apartment, dusty and dark. The ceiling was low joists and old wiring. A sealed chimney chase, maybe, or a closet from a previous floor plan that someone had walled over decades ago. It was empty. Almost. The flashlight beam found them in the far left corner, pushed against the brick. Objects, arranged with a kind of care that made my skin tighten. A sleeping bag, dark green, compact, rolled halfway and then abandoned. Beside it, a pillow. Not a couch cushion, not a folded blanket. An actual pillow, the kind you buy at a store, with a white pillowcase that had yellowed along the edges. A plastic water bottle, empty, crushed slightly in the middle. A phone charger plugged into an extension cord that ran along the baseboard and disappeared into a gap between the hardwood and the wall. Wired into the apartment's electrical, pulling from the same outlets I used every day. Someone had been living in this space. Not a rat, not a pipe, not the building settling in the cold. A person. In a space the width of a coffin and the length of a room, sealed behind a wall, with a sleeping bag and a pillow and a phone charger. I pulled back from the opening so fast I fell onto my hip. The flashlight clattered on the floor and rolled, its beam spinning across the ceiling before settling on the far wall. I scrambled to grab it, got back to the opening, and pointed the light inside again. The sleeping bag was unzipped. The pillow had an indentation. Not old, not flattened by time. A fresh dip, the kind a head leaves when it's been resting there recently. I moved the beam slowly across the space, inch by inch, my breath coming in short pulls now. The brick wall, the dusty floor, the extension cord running to its gap, the water bottle. And next to the water bottle, almost invisible against the dark floor, a single strand of long brown hair. I thought of the photograph. Nora, November 2021. Brown hair, thin face, flannel shirt. I thought of Gil's voice on the phone. She was going through something. That's part of why she left. I thought of the gouges on the inside of the door frame. Deep, frantic, clawed into the wood from the inside. Not someone trying to get in. Someone trying to get out. Someone whose door had been locked from the outside by a landlord who owned 4 units and had keys to all of them, and visited when he wanted. and told the new tenant that's about it with the particular firmness of a man who needed the questions to stop. Nora hadn't left. Nora hadn't stopped answering the door. Nora had found the space behind the wall, and then the space behind the wall had become the last place she was ever seen. I stood up. My legs were shaking. The music was still playing from my phone in the living room. Piano, gentle, absurdly calm. I backed out of the office for the second time that week, but this time I didn't close the door. This time I grabbed my phone, my keys, my coat, and I left the apartment. Down the stairs, past the faded wallpaper and the creaking third step, through the front door and onto the sidewalk. I stood in the cold November air and called the police. Not the non-emergency line. Not Gil. 911. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My voice was steady too, and I've thought about that since. How the body decides what to feel and when. How it can hold the shaking in reserve and let you function when you need to. I think something happened to someone in my apartment, I said. In the wall. There's a space in the wall, and I think someone was living in it, and I think something happened to them. The dispatcher asked for my address. I gave it. She asked if I was safe. I looked up at the building, the bay windows on the second floor, warm light spilling out because I'd left every light on. The building looked the same as it always did, Victorian, old, honest, except it had never been honest. Not once. 2 patrol cars arrived within 8 minutes. I know because I counted the seconds from the sidewalk, standing under the streetlight with my coat zipped to my chin and my arms crossed tight against my body. Not because of the cold, although it was cold, but because if I didn't hold myself together physically, I wasn't sure the rest of me would follow. They went upstairs. I waited outside. A neighbor from the first floor, a man I'd never spoken to, 60s, reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, came out and stood on the porch and asked me what was going on. I said I didn't know. He looked at the patrol cars, looked at me, and went back inside without another word. About 20 minutes later, one of the officers came down and asked me to walk them through it. I did. Back up the stairs, into the apartment, into the office. The opening in the wall was exactly as I'd left it, the plywood patch leaning against the baseboard, the dark gap behind it, the flashlight still on the floor where I'd dropped it. The second officer was crouched in front of the opening with his own flashlight, scanning the space. They asked me questions. When I'd moved in, when I'd found the notebook, when I'd opened the wall. They asked about Gil. I told them everything he'd told me. Nora Feltz, 3 years, stopped answering, half-cleared apartment. I told them about the phone call, the pause in his voice when I mentioned the wall, the way he'd described Nora as fixated. They wrote things down. One of them photographed the space, the sleeping bag, the pillow, the charger cable running to its hidden outlet. The other went through Nora's notebook page by page at the kitchen table, turning each one carefully like it was evidence, which, by then, I suppose it was. They told me not to touch anything in the space. They told me a detective would follow up. They asked if I had somewhere else to stay. I said yes. They didn't tell me what they thought had happened, and I didn't ask, because by that point the question had changed shape in my head. It wasn't what happened to Nora anymore. It was how long. How long had someone been in that space before Nora heard the first knock? How long had they been there after she disappeared? How long between Gil sealing the wall shut and me signing a lease for an apartment with golden light and incredible water pressure? The sleeping bag was dusty but not rotted. The pillow was yellowed but not decayed. The extension cord was still pulling power. These were not artifacts from years ago. These were recent, active. I stayed at Priya's that night, told her everything this time. The notebook, the measurements, the wall, the sleeping bag, the hair. She listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was scared too. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You're not going back there." Not a question. I didn't go back. Not to sleep, not to stay. I went back once, 4 days later, with Priya and 2 boxes, to pack essentials in daylight. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Lights on, piano still cued on my phone's Bluetooth, the office door open, the hole in the wall gaping like a mouth mid-sentence. The police tape across the opening was the only new addition, yellow and blunt and inadequate. I packed fast, didn't look at the wall, didn't look at the photograph of Nora that was still sitting on my desk where I'd left it the night I first read her notebook. I took my clothes, my laptop, my documents, left the furniture, left the air mattress, left the tape measure on the desk because the thought of touching it made my hands feel wrong. The detective called me 5 days after that. A woman named Ruiz, direct and unhurried, with the kind of voice that suggested she'd had conversations like this before and had learned not to soften them. The space behind the wall showed signs of repeated habitation over an extended period. Her words. Repeated habitation. Not a single night, not a squatter passing through. Someone had been using that space, entering it, sleeping in it, leaving it, for what forensics estimated was several months to over a year. The extension cord had been spliced into the building's wiring by someone who knew what they were doing. There were scratch marks on the inside of the brick near the baseboard, grouped in sets of 5, like tallies, or like fingers dragging across a surface in the dark. They had not found Nora Feltz. The sister in Delaware had been located. The disconnected number was old, she had a new one, and she confirmed she hadn't heard from Nora since January. She'd filed a missing persons report in March that had gone nowhere. She cried on the phone with the detective. She said Nora had mentioned a sound in the walls. She said Nora had mentioned the landlord dismissing her. She said Nora had stopped calling and she'd assumed it was depression, distance, the drift that happens between siblings who live in different states and forget to try. Gil was questioned. I don't know the details. Detective Ruiz shared some things and withheld others, and I've learned not to fill the gaps with my own imagination because my imagination goes to places I can't come back from easily. What I know is this. Gil admitted to sealing the wall. He said he'd found the opening after Nora left, her word, left, and patched it because he didn't want the next tenant asking questions about it. He said he assumed Nora had cut the hole herself during her episode. He said he'd never been inside the space. He said he didn't know about the sleeping bag, the pillow, the charger. The police did not find enough evidence to charge him with anything. Not then. The investigation, as far as I know, is still listed as open. Nora Feltz is still listed as missing. The apartment is still listed on Gil's rental portfolio. I checked once, months later. The listing described it as a charming 2-bedroom with original hardwood, bay windows, and great natural light. It did not mention the 3rd room. I think about that space constantly. Not the objects in it, though those visit me too, especially the pillow with its indentation, the shape of a head that might have been Nora's or might have been someone else's entirely. What I think about most is the geometry of it. 2 feet of dark, sealed behind plaster, running the width of a room. A space designed to be forgotten. And someone, not Nora, someone before her or beside her or behind her, had found it, furnished it, wired it for power, and used it. Had lain in it at night, 2 feet from where a woman sat at her desk and heard breathing she couldn't explain. Had existed in the wall the way a heartbeat exists inside a chest, hidden, constant, closer than you think. Nora heard it. She wrote it down. She measured the room and found the discrepancy, and told her landlord and her sister, and probably herself over and over, that something was wrong. And she was right. She was right about all of it. The building wasn't making noise. The wall wasn't settling. It wasn't rats. Something was in there. And when she opened the wall to prove it, she became part of the proof. I have a new apartment now. 3rd floor, modern building, thin walls, but no hidden spaces. I checked. I measured every room the day I moved in. Priya helped. She didn't comment on it. She just held the other end of the tape and wrote down the numbers while I compared them to the building's floor plan, which I'd requested from the management office before I signed anything. The numbers matched. Every room accounted for. No gaps, no dead space, no dark pockets sealed behind plaster where something could exist without being seen. But sometimes at night, when the building is quiet and I'm lying in bed waiting for sleep, I hear a sound. Not knocking, not breathing, just the building settling. A creak, a tick, the ordinary language of wood and metal adjusting to the cold. And I hold my breath, and I count the seconds, and I wait for it to resolve into something I can name. It always does. It's always the building. It's always nothing. But Nora thought that too. For a while.